GoatFish. GoatFish. Goat versus fish. Wants to continue GoatFish. We keep VSMASS alive. We keep VSMASS alive with GoatFish. Let us look at that GoatFish. Let us look at that GoatFish. Let us look at that GoatFish. It is a unification. It is a unification. But how long can the unification last? How long can the unification last? Well, we shall just have to see. We shall just have to see. It's between the goat and the fishy. It's between the goat and the fishy. Just how long can it be that goat and fish can remain in unity? It depends on the goat and fishy, on the fish and goatee. It depends on the fish and the goat. It depends on the goat and the fish. It doesn't so much depend on the fence, but it depends on the goat and the fish. How long can we remain in unification? How long can we remain in unification? We shall have to see. We shall have to see with goat versus fish. We shall have to see with goat versus fish. Welcome to GoatFish. Welcome to GoatFish. This is goat, and this is fish, and I am the GoatFish. I am the GoatFish, goat versus fish. We hope you are having a mighty VSMASS. We hope you are having a mighty VSMASS. And goat versus fish. Oh, goat versus fish had a little verses. Goat versus fish had a verses we wanted to do, but we have forgotten all about it because it is GoatFish. Because it is GoatFish. Goat versus fish. Goat versus fish. Go to goat versus fish. Yes, this is how we maintain the stream of the fish. Fern 6728, I'm trying to sleep. Well, don't let goat versus fish stop you from sleeping. You could sleep to goat versus fish. You could be awake to goat versus fish. How can goat versus fish help you to sleep? How can goat versus fish help you to sleep? Fern 6728. Make some quiet noise. Make some quiet noise for Fern 6728, the great fish. Make some noise for this fish. It says it is trying to sleep, so when you make noise for this fish, don't make too loud a noise. Just make a little bit of noise for the fish. A little bit of celebration for the fish. And we cannot promise you. Yes, shh, yes, shh. Time release, quiet. Fern 6728 is trying to sleep. Do you see? Fern 6728 is trying to sleep. We have to keep a quiet verses. But we wonder time release. Are you goat or are you fish? Are you goat or are you fish? Time release. This is not a trick question. This is a trick question. Are you goat? Or are you fish? Oh, you wish to hear a story? Well, the story is about you. The story is about you. The story is about you and whether or not you are a goat or a fish. Jason TZ is a goat. Celebration for goat. Celebration for goat. Celebration for Jason TZ, the goat. Fern will be awake. Fern will be awake. Welcome to Fern. Welcome to Fern. Welcome to Fern. Jason TZ is a goat. Look at that. Look. Goat versus fish. Look, you can see that goat versus fish is directing your verses to Jason TZ. That is a goat. Celebration for goat. Celebration for goat. Oh, they are already rating goat versus fish. They're already rating goat versus fish. They're already rating goat versus fish. They're already rating goat versus fish. Mr. Rev on 7 rates goat versus fish. Welcome to goat versus fish. Mr. Rev on 7, stay around for this verses. If you did not hear the last verses, we are keeping the Versmith spirit alive, and we do not know if a spirit is a goat or a fish. Catsfay, King of Bogars, Jason TZ, welcome to Goat versus Fish. Mr. Rev on 7, welcome to Goat versus Fish. I'm about that goat versus miss. My hooves go clop. I'm about that horn swagger. I'm about that climb to the top. Some call me Billy Miser. Whatever I touch versus fish in my clutch. I'm too much goat versus fish. Merry Versmiths, we are keeping the Versmiths alive with GoatFish. How long can the goat and fish remain in unification? It depends on you, it depends on time release, it depends on Jason TZ, it depends on all the ones who are coming here. From Mr. Revon 7, if you are here from Mr. Revon 7, we want to hear in the chat, we want to see in the chat, are you goat or are you fish? Are you goat or are you fish? Put if you are goat or you are fish in the verses, and we will give you a celebration. We will give you a celebration. Perhaps you do not want a goat Versmiths. I'm about that fish Versmiths. I'm about that fin. I'm about that tail slapping. I'm about to go for a swim. Some call me miser. Whatever I touch versus goat in my clutch. I'm too much Mr. Evans, the goat. And that is what was wrote, and that is what was wrote. Welcome, Revenites to Goat versus Fish. Revel in Goat versus Fish. Revel in Goat versus Fish. Oh yes, we have heard you be called Revenites. We have heard you be called Huckleberries. We do wonder if a huckleberry is a goat or a fish. We do wonder if a huckleberry is a goat or a fish. We wonder all of these verses. Time release. Did time release declare goat? Did time release declare goat? Time release declared goat. Time release declared goat. Celebration for goat. Celebration for goat. Celebration for goat. Yes, we celebrate the goat. We celebrate the goat. We celebrate the goat. And the goat is versus the fish. And Sweet September Fish, Sweet September Fish, Sweet September Fish, Sweet September Fish, Dolly Munster Goat, Dolly Munster versus Sweet September, Goat versus Fish, Goat versus Fish, Goat versus Fish, Goat versus Fish. Sweet September. Dolly Munster, but Goat versus Fish, but Goat versus Fish. Z-Sato declares goat, Z-Sato declares goat. Z-Sato declares goat celebration. But Goat versus Fish was getting all into the verses. But have we forgotten the feeling, that feeling of goat fish? Have we already forgotten that feeling of goat fish? When goat gets unification with fish. What is this with goat versus fish in any verses? Is that a goat? This year, is this a goat? We wanted to have a festive verses, so we created a festive verses. But is that actually a goat? There with goat versus fish? Sweet September, Dolly Munster, Z Subtle, Mr. Revan 7, Casfey, Time Release. Is that a goat, Jason TZ? Is that actually a goat? Are you a goat? Are you goat or are you fish? Answer goat versus fish. You look like you are a horned goat, but are you goat or are you fish? We are asking you this. We are asking you this. Goat versus fish. Ah, that is not a goat. Z Subtle says that is not a goat. Well, if that is not a goat, Sweet September, that is a deer or an elk. A deer goat? Could it be a deer goat? The goat versus fish? DJ Easy Dave, I declare, you have forgotten fish. I declare you have forgotten fish. You declare I have forgotten fish? You think goat versus fish forgot the fish? Well, first versus, we have a fish right here. We have a fish right here, DJ Easy Dave. Look at the fish. Look at the fish in unification with the goat and with goatfish. And we have the fish. We have the fish. And we have the fish. We have the fish. We've got the fish. We've got the fish, and we also even have fish. Oh, wait, that is a goat. That is a goat. But we also have fish. Oh, that is a pitiable fence-sitter that chooses neither goat nor fish. Ah, but we do have fish. Oh, bloodmouth fish. Oh, fish. It will consume the goat. It will consume the goat. It will nibble at you. It will nibble at your hindquarters, goat. It consumes you. It consumes you. It consumes you. Yes, it's a vicious versus. But goatfish. But unification of goatfish. Goatfish, goat and fish, fish and goat of the land and the fish of the sea, goat and fish in unity of goatfish, goatfish. Yes, we are keeping goatfish. We are keeping a celebration of goatfish. We don't want to let the goatfish go. We worked so hard to achieve a unification of goat and fish, even for just a little verses. It is pretty much goat. We thought that it was pretty much goat, but let us see. Time release. Time release. It is time to release your suspicion and fear about goat versus fish, and just embrace the verses. Goat versus fish. Embrace the verses of goatfish. Embrace goatfish. Merry verse miss. Merry verse miss. Merry verse miss to all goat and fish. Merry verse miss. Follow goat versus fish. Cheer for goat versus fish. Merry verse miss. Merry verse miss. Yes, it is a verse miss. And on verse miss, we celebrate goatfish. We celebrate goatfish on verse miss. It is a mass of verses, and we say, yes, it is a mass of verses, and yet it is goatfish. What could be simpler than this verses? On verse miss, we celebrate goatfish. We celebrate goatfish on verse miss. Goatfish! 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 Goat are goat, fish are fish. Goat and fish all night and all day. Goat and fish in every way. It's goatfish. Goatfish. It is still goatfish. It's still goatfish. They have been time released. They have been carrying goat milk at the store lately. I've been wanting to try. You should try the goat milk. You should try the goat milk. You should try the goat milk. Goat milk is, well, it is apart from fish milk, it is really the only milk that you can have, because there is only goat and fish. So you should try goat milk, and you should compare it to fish milk, and you should see which one is more versus to you. Perhaps that will solidify your choosing. Yes, but they make goat milk butter, and they make goat milk goat cheese. They make goat cheese. Yes. They make everything from goat. Or fish. Fern 6728, hearting. Yes, we heart goat versus fish. We heart goat versus fish. DJ's Dave is making some kind of emoting verses. It is saying, hey, or hello, I am the GoatFish. It's saying, hello, I am the GoatFish. And Fern6728 is now giving some sort of fancy hashing tags. You see there, you see just there? You see just there, it says I, and then there's a fence tag, and then there is this fence sitter that we don't know if it is goat or fish. Fern6728 wonders, when will you ascend? When will you ascend? Oh, goat versus fish will ascend right now. The ascension of goat versus fish. Wow! The ascension of goat versus fish. Can you believe it? Oh, it is a versus madrigal. It is a versus madrigal. The ascension. The ascension. It is an ascension of goat and fish. Goat and fish ascended. Goat and fish ascended. GoatFish, 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 GoatFish. It is an ascension of GoatFish. Yes, you can see the goat. It is actually goat and fish. It is actually goat and fish. If you look deep within them, you can see that they are goat or fish. You can see that they are goat and fish. Yes, but we still have an interrogation to do. We still have an interrogation to do. You! Are you goat or fish? Are you goat or fish? We are speaking to you. We are speaking to you now. We are speaking to, yes, we are speaking to you. Are you goat or are you fish? You look like you could be a fish. You look like you could be a fish bone, which of course is fish. But are you goat or are you fish? We want you to tell goat versus fish directly now. Tell goat versus fish if you are goat or if you are fish. It is not enough that you seem like a fish. We thought this would be a festive versus to celebrate the goat and the fish, but the more goat versus fish ponders it, there's something fancy about it. Something fancy about it. You need to declare goat, and you need to declare fish, and you need to declare fish, or you can goat, or you can declare goat, and you can declare fish. Perhaps you are the goat. Perhaps you are the fish. Are you a goat? Are you a fish? Which is goat and which is fish? Which is goat and which is fish? This is the question. Never shall then exchange. Never shall then exchange. Exchange goat and fish? We can exchange goat and fish in any verses. Oh, the goat and the fish. Which verses? Wow! The exchange of goat and fish. The exchange of goat and fish. Fish, goat. Fish, goat. Fish are fish. Goat are goat. Fish and goat all day and all night. Fish and goat with all of your might. It's fish, goat, fish, goat. Unification! Fern6728, oh no, goat versus fish. Oh, Fern6728 with the sad versus sad medieval versus. It is on the verse. Fern6728, oh no, oh no, oh no. Fern6728 is on the verse. Oh no. Fern6728 is on the verse. You are led down the primrose verses. You're seeking fish and goatses. You come to the end of the verses looking for a pot of old verses of goat versus fish, and you find the fence. Oh no, oh no. Goatfish, are you goat? Are you fish? Fern6728 was mighty fish, but on Versmas it sat on the fence. How much longer can we do this fancy Dance on Versmas. On Versmas. On Versmas. Dance, sitting all night and all day. Bent, sitting in every way. It had no say, it had no parlay to choose goat or fish. Goat or fish, goat or fish, fish or goat, goat or fish. Oh, Fern, oh, Fern, oh no. Fern is on the fence, Fern is on the fence. You shed a tear, you cry for yourself. You see what you did for yourself. You see what you did to yourself, Fern. Do you see what you did to yourself? You do it to yourself, just you. That's why it really hurts. You're sitting on the fence, just you. You and no one else, you're on the fence. Look at it sit on the fence. Look at it sit on the fence. DJ's Dave, can goat truly claim the experience of fish? Can goat truly claim the experience of fish? Well, we shall have to see. Are there any goat? Calling all goat, calling all goat, calling all goat. DJ's Dave challenges you to claim you have the experience of fish. Well, it does not challenge you. It would be more of a versus if it challenged you, but it does say, can the goat truly claim the experience of fish? But let us ponder this in the verses of GoatFish, in the verses of GoatFish. We are in goat and fish unification. We are in unification of GoatFish. But the goat is pondering of this unification. Can the goat truly claim to have the same experience as the fish as they are in unification, Remember the same verses, the same pitiable verses that you entered the fence, Fern. You can leave again. You can leave again the fence. You can leave the fence and you can return to goat or fish and you can return to the Versmas celebration. Oh, fence sitter, look how much fun we're having with goat versus fish. Oh, wow, it is goatfish. Wow, it's still a celebration. It is still a celebration. It is still a celebration. Goat versus fish. But let us look at the verses. Goat versus fish. We need to check a verses. We need to check a verses. This is important to goat versus fish. On this verses it all depends. Goat versus fish. Minding the verses. Minding the verses now. Minding the verses. And seeing here. Goat versus fish. Jason TZ raided with a party of 8 17 minutes ago. Jason TZ, thank you for raiding goat versus fish. You raided goat versus fish. You should follow Jason TZZZZ. You should follow Jason TZZZZ, and you should follow Kazfe, and you should follow Mr. Evan Sevon, and you should follow King of Boogers, and everyone that you see in the chat, you just follow them now. That is what Goat versus Fish is saying to you. Dolly Munster, yes. Z Subtle, yes. Goat versus Fish, let us see. Goat versus Fish has many verses here, Goat versus Fish. Goat versus Fish. Goat versus Fish. Goat versus Fish. So many verses. Goat versus Fish is going to add one for Z Subtle now. It's going to add one for Z Subtle. Goat versus Fish. Goat versus Fish. Because Goat versus Fish has been here for Goat versus Fish. And on GoatFish, we want to give the gift of verses. So, Goat versus Fish will tell you this. If you want a shout out from Goat versus Fish, then ask for a shout out from Goat versus Fish. And if you add bits, it will be even more of a shouting out from Goat versus Fish. But we are feeling generous this versus because it is GoatFish. And Seth and Sleuth Rock, Seth Rules Rock says, Merry Christmas, Goat versus Fish, Merry Christmas, Goat versus Fish. If only we knew if a Christmas was a goat or a fish. Is Christmas, goat or fish? Is Christmas, goat or fish? Boggers, poggers, Jason TZ poggers. DJ's Dave. What man can truly unify goat and fish? What man can unify goat and fish? Some say goat versus fish is a sham. Some say goat fish is a scam. Some say goat versus fish is a man. But I am what I am. And I am goat versus fish. Goat versus fish, that is live on the Twitch. Goat versus fish. Goat versus fish is now live on the YouTube and the Book of Faces and the Twitch. Goat versus fish brings the verses to you. This verse misses goatfish, yet it is true. How can goat and fish unify? We are asking you. We are asking you. How goat and fish can unification? Burn with the fish, burn with the fish. What? Do not tease goatfish. Do not tease goatfish with your presents. If you have a present to give goat versus fish, if you have a present to give the goatfish, then declare fish. Then be a fish. Then be a fish. Burn 678. Are you just showing fish, or are you saying that now you are fish and that you're off the fence and that you are fish? Z subtle. Oh, with the love for the goatfish. With the love for the goatfish. With the love for the goatfish. Sweet September with the fish. Celebration for Sweet September the fish. Goat versus fish. But goat versus fish thought. Fern 6728. Are you goat or fish? Are you declaring fish? Are you declaring fish? Are you declaring fish? Z Subtle says that goats are greater than fish. Even on goatfish, Z Subtle, we are asking you, Z Subtle, are you saying that even in goat and fish unification that the goat is greater than the fish? Or is that a goat that is pointing its horn at a fish? Explain this verses. It looks like it is a verses. It looks like you are saying goat and then it is a verses. It is the V of the verses, but then you are turning the verses in this verses. And you are saying goat versus fish. Are you saying goat versus fish? Are you saying goat versus fish on goatfish? Wouldn't that be a versus? Fern 6728. Fern 6728. This is for you. This is for you. This is for you. For 100 bits. For 100 bits, you get 10 jangles of goatfish. Ten jingles of goatfish for Fern! 10 jingles of goatfish for Fern! Yeah, celebration, celebration! Hello, is that you, goatfish? Yes, this is goat versus fish. Yes, are you still celebrating goatfish? Oh, you are. Can goat versus fish come to celebrate goatfish? Yes, thank you, yes, where are you, GoatFish? Oh, you are already here with Goat vs. Fish. Oh, you are part of Goat vs. Fish? Well, anyway, how's the verses? Ah, yes, of course, we should just speak of this when Goat vs. Fish joins you, GoatFish. Yes, Goat vs. Fish will be right there, and we are already here because we are Goat vs. Fish the GoatFish. Oh, Goat vs. Fish. It sounds like a fence fell outside. Outside the fence. You see, here we are trapped by the fence. Some verses we hear sounds. We hear the sound of a fence falling. We hear the sound of a fence falling. We heard the sound of a fence falling somewhere. Perhaps it was Fern. Perhaps it was Fern. Goat and fish are. True verses. Goat and fish are. King of Bogers, with the celebration. Zisatl now clarifying the verses that goat are greater than fish. The goat are greater than fish. But perhaps goat are greater than fish, and fish are greater than goat, and goat are greater than... Fish again. Goat versus fish. What is happening out there in the verses? There's some fenciness happening out there with goat versus fish. But we are just going to keep on versing. Goat versus fish. Goat versus fish. Goat fish. Goat fish. Goat and fish and fish. Goatfish is the one simple rule. Goatfish should be taught in your school. A fish and goat. Goatfish. King of Boogers declaring verses. Yes, someone is having quite a loud celebration out there. It is. They are sending up verses. They are saying, "Goatfish is ended, and they are sending up a verses and. It is an explosion of verses. But we are still here. And we are still maintaining GoatFish for as long as we can. We are maintaining GoatFish for as long as we can. On the first verse of GoatFish, the GoatFish gave to me. A goat versus a fish. On the second verse of GoatFish, the GoatFish gave to me 2 goat and fish, and a goat versus a fish. On the third verse of GoatFish, the GoatFish gave to me 3 goatfish, 2 goat and fish, and a goat versus a fish. A Tweedious raid! Goat, thank you for announcing your raid. We wished you to announce the raid to Goat vs. Fish because Goat vs. Fish, because when we are Goat... Welcome to Tweedious Goat! We wish you a merry Verse-Miss. We wish you a merry Verse-Miss. We wish you a merry Verse-Miss. And a goat and a fish. Fine verses we bring to all goat and fish. Fine verses for GoatFish and a mighty verses. GoatFish, you a mighty goat. GoatFish, GoatFish, you a mighty GoatFish. It is some verses as this. We are trying to maintain a celebration while there are exploding verses out there. Exploding verses. Thank you to Tweedious Goat, who is still here in the verse. Many are still here in the verse. Thank you, Tweedious Goat, for rating Goat versus Fish. We are feeling Tweedious Goat. There's the goat. There's the powerful Tweedious Goat. Look at Tweedious Goat. Oh, gathering power. Tweedious Goat. We suspect when we formed the unity of GoatFish, when Verse-Miss began last verses, we asked the goat and fish in a poll if they wanted goat and fish unification or if they wanted goat versus fish. And there were 7 that wanted goat and fish unification. But there was 1 that wanted goat versus fish, and we know that Tweedious Goat was there, and we suspect that Tweedious Goat is there, biding its verses. Oh yes, it has been on the mountain, it has been on mountain land. Tweedious Goat returns from mountain land. is hungry for verse. It is hungry for verse. It is hungry for verse. Merry Christmas, Merry Christmas. Thank you, Denna. Thank you. Fern6728 with another 100 bits. Fern6728 with another 100 bits. And declaring fish. Celebration of fish. What you get 10 jangles from Goat versus Fish. 10 jangles of GoatFish for your second 100 bits from Fern6728 the Great. Here they are for you. Celebration! The celebration of GoatFish continues. Celebration! Is Christmas goat or fish? Is Christmas goat or fish? Tweediest Goat getting ready to reap the fish. Denna, thank you for being here with Goat versus Fish. You should follow Denna. And you should follow Tweediest. And Goat versus Fish. We are doing this Goat versus Fish. It's a very simple versus. We cannot simply SO. But we can do this. We can do this. And we can do this. We can Goat versus Fish. We can make a new versus. We can make a new versus for Denna. Because we need you to go there and remind Denna that just because it is an amazing and powerful goat does not mean that there is not a fish that may want to form unification because it thinks it is just as powerful as the goat, and even though you are a fish, King of Bogors returning powerful fish to Tweediest Goat, but King of Bogors also giving a little GoatFish. Goat versus Fish in my verses? Yes, we are verses. We are GoatFish. We are GoatFish. We are GoatFish. We are GoatFish. Yo, blow the fence down. We blow down the fences as goats stay to drown. Oh, give us some birds to blow the fence down. Blow the fence down. Blow the fence down. Yay, blow the fence down. The goat's gonna wrestle that fish to the ground. Oh, give us some birds to blow the fence down. I once knew a goat and it went out to sea. Yo, blow the fence down. It didn't remember that goat couldn't swim. Oh, give us some birds to blow the fence down. The goat dove the water while searching for fish. Way, blow the fence down. It drowned in the sea and ended up on my dish. Oh, give us some birds to blow the fence down. The dish was for fish and was eating the goat. Way, blow the fence down. The fish took a bite and it started to choke. Oh, give us some birds to blow the fence down. Blow the fence down, goaties, blow the fence down. Way, blow the fence down. And maybe next verse on your horns you put floaties. Oh, give us some birds to blow the fence down. Goatfish, goatfish, goat and fish, fish and goat. Goatfish was staying around singing yo, oh, blow the fence down, blow the fence down, blow the fence down. Blow the fence down, blow the fence down, blow the fence down. We are blowing the fence down, we are blowing the fence down. Goat versus fish. We are blowing the fence down. We are blowing the fence down only to find, what do we find? Oh, why are we truly gathered here this verses? We are here to celebrate GoatFish. But there seems to be something lurking behind, just behind Goat versus Fish. Fish maybe Scythe? Interesting verses. But there are also Goat versus Fish, there are also Goat versus Fish. Just because Tweedious Goat is goat does not mean that fish are not welcome. Ah, you welcome the fish, you welcome the fish. You see, Tweedious Goat welcomes you. Tweedious Goat welcomes you, fish welcomes you, fish. Goat really wants to know about before the fence times, but there's something there's something that is just niggling on the back of Goat versus Fish. Is it some fence that is poking at Goat versus Fish? What is it? Goat versus Fish is wishing everyone mighty Versmiss and a merry GoatFish. And they keep speaking. There's this other one they keep speaking about. They are speaking it of yes, it was what Denna was saying. They are saying Mary's Crizzlebish? Mary's Crizzfish? Or is it Mary Goatmiss? Mary Goat versus Fish? Yes, they are having some sort of celebration. You see, it was inspired by Goat versus Fish many verses ago, before the fence time, Tweedious Goat. Goat versus Fish was, of course, spreading the verses of Versmiss and of GoatFish, and how we celebrate the unification of Goat and Fish on Versmiss. And you see, Goat versus Fish is perceived in many ways by many different Goat and Fish. And over the verses, they have changed Goat versus Fish to suit their own verses, you know. So we suspect that this cursed mass must be one of these verses of Goat versus Fish that they reimagine to suit their own verses, and after enough verses it becomes so different from Goat versus Fish, and yet still the same as Goat versus Fish, because it is actually just Goat versus Fish. But that is not all that is Goat versus Fish. There is also Goat versus Fish in every way, Goat versus Fish, no matter what you say. It is in all things. And yet right now, because it is Crizzlebish, that is why we think there is this sensation that Goat versus Fish, that someone is watching Goat versus Fish, that someone is watching Goat versus Fish? That someone is watching Goat versus Fish? Goat versus Fish? Or perhaps it is that Goat versus Fish is watching someone. Could it be that Goat versus Fish is watching someone? Goat versus Fish? Oh no, not enough Goat versus Fish. No, we need more Goat versus Fish. We need Goat versus Fish. We need Goat versus Fish. We need Goat versus Fish. Yes, this should be Goat versus Fish. 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 Don't sit on the fence. Goat versus Fish. Goat versus Fish. Goat versus Fish. Goat. Goat versus Fish. Fish. Goat versus Fish. Goat versus Fish. Who is that? Who are you? Who are you? Who exactly do you claim to be? What do you say you are? What are you? Who are you? We keep seeing you around, and yet we do not know who you are. We have been trying to speak to you. Because everyone says that we should speak to you. They say, oh, you should speak to that one. You should speak to that one. And Goat vs. Fish tries to speak to you. You never respond to Goat vs. Fish. You never respond to Goat vs. Fish. Fading away, Goat vs. Fish. Never responded to Goat vs. Fish. How many tweets must we send at you? How many verses must we ask you if you're goat or fish? Pitiably offense sitter. Pitiably offense sitter. Goat versus fish. Well, we will leave you to ponder the question of goat versus fish. Goat versus fish asks you now. Are you goat or fish? Are you goat or are you fish? Don't go away from goat versus fish. We are asking you, are you goat or are you fish? Are you goat or fish? Are you goat or are you fish? Answer goat versus fish. Answer goat versus... Why won't it answer goat versus fish? Perhaps you cannot hear in that verses. Goat versus fish. Are you goat or are you fish? Did you magically create many fish out of one fish? We heard you made fish out of fish. Here is a fish, here is a fish. Make a fish out of the fish. Make a fish out of the fish. It is still but one fish. It is still but one fish. If goat versus fish could make one fish into two fish just like this. Goat versus fish. But they celebrate you more than they celebrate goat versus fish. When we just made fish, we can make a fish into two fish. We can make two fish into three fish. We can make one goat multiplication into many goat. Look at what can do goat versus fish. And you can't even choose goat or fish. You can't even choose goat or fish. Are you goat or are you fish? Goat versus fish. Very fancy, very fancy. Make a fish out of a fish. Oh yes, goat versus fish. Goat versus fish has a fish. And we made a fish out of the fish. Wow, we made a fish out of the fish. We made a fish out of the fish. Who is that? Goat versus fish does not know. Denna is about that goat miss. Denna is about that goat miss. Denna's about that goat versus miss. Denna's about that hoof. Denna's about that horn. Swagger. What verses with hoof? What verses with hoof? Well, we could say it is a look. We could say it has a goatee look. We could say that it does the verses by the book and it is written that it is goat. Or we could just start the verses. We could start the verses again and just do the verses that the classic goat verses. We will do the classic verses. Denna's bout that goat, verse Miss Denna's hooves go clop. Denna's bout that horn swagger. Denna's gonna climb to the top. Some call Denna fish miser. Whatever it touch, there's his fish in its clutch. Denna's too much. Is it too much goat for you? Is it too much goat for you? Oh no, oh no, oh yes, we sing a verses for you. We sing a verses for you. Goat versus fish, get in there, goat, get in there, goat. Get in there, goat. It is still goat fish, it is still unification. Oh, look at goat and fish, look at goat and fish and unification. Goat and fish and unification. Make a fish out of a fish. Yes, goat versus fish. Enough of that verses. We have not forgotten you. We will ask you if you are goat or fish again. Do you have one that they are calling? What do they? Goat versus fish. Goat versus fish. We heard you had an uncle. Uncle, yes. We heard you had an uncle that they are calling dog. Or is it a mother? Goat versus fish. There is one that begat you. That we have heard about, and if you will not answer goat versus fish, then we will speak to the one that begat you, and then we will ask it if you are goat or fish, and then we will check with you because it is up to you to decide if you are goat or fish. Perhaps that is your fence. Perhaps that is your fence. You are just living in the fence. You are living in the fence. what is that you said, goat versus fish? They ended you they nailed you to a fence. They nailed you to a fence, they did. Oh, that is very unpleasant, goat versus fish. So they took you and they nailed you to a fence and just let you end your verses just as this. Oh, that is, ooh. And you are still on that fence? You are still on that fence? Oh, you claim to have risen from the fence. But now that you versus it, goat versus fish has seen you still on the fence, has seen you still on the fence, has seen you still on the fence, still on the fence, still on the fence, 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 fence. Fence, 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 fence. Tommy Gallegos, always goat. Tommy Gallegos, always goat. Celebration for goat. Celebration for goat. And we have dinner. I love your new interface. Very fancy. Oh, you do not even know. Goat versus fish. Tweediest Goat, are you still there? Do you still want to know what happened before the fence times, Tweediest Goat? Tweediest Goat, we will show you a verses. We will show you a verses from before the fence times. Yes! Goat versus fish. Now, goat versus fish. Well, goat versus fish. Let us just see if we can do a little verses. First verses, goat versus fish. Enough of this fence sitter. Pitiably was really forced upon the fence, was nailed on the fence. Well, if we want to go before the fence times, then we have to go back to the verses. We have to go back to the verses. Goat versus fish. Goat versus fish. This is the goat fish. This is the goat fish. They want to know about before the fence times. We have to go back in verses. We have to go back in verses. Goat versus fish. Goat versus fish. Goat fish. Goat versus fish. 44 goats and 44 fish per verses. Goat versus fish. Goat versus fish. Goat versus fish. Goat versus fish. What is that? Why are you raising that fence out of the back of the verses? Oh, goat versus fish. Oh, trust goat versus fish. We're gonna need that fence. The verses. Oh, it's powering. It is powering. It is powering the verses. It's the fence capacitor. It's the fence capacitor. It's what makes verse travel possible. Oh, we are back in verses now. We are back in verses. And that means goat versus fish is going to show you a verses from before the fence times. Goat versus fish. Goat versus fish is going to show you a verses from before the fence times. Goat versus fish. Yes, are we ready for a verses of before the fence times? Yes, there's no better way to do it than to simply show you the very verses, to show you the very verses. Goat versus fish. We must show you the very verses. Goat versus fish. Goat versus fish. Let us see the verses. Goat versus goat versus fish. This is an amazing verses. This is an amazing verses to behold. Let it be told, this is an amazing verses to behold, and goat versus fish is going to show you this verses. It's going to show you this verses now, and you will let us see if we can, if goat versus fish can do this verses. Yes, goat versus fish, goat versus fish, goat versus fish, goat versus fish. Yes. Oh, look now. See you here. You can see goat versus fish from before the fence times. This is on the YouTube where you can subscribe to Goat vs. Fish. And tell Goat vs. Fish, if you can hear this verses, if you can hear this verses, let us listen to the verses. Let us listen to the verses. Are you goat or are you fish? Are you goat or fish? It is for you to choose. I just got mine early. Right, with goat versus fish. You went with goat versus fish. Now you went with goat versus fish. Do not be afraid to let the feeling of a goat or fish flow from you. The sea of the fish dripping from the eye of a goat, or perhaps a fish.
Ah, you are with goat versus fish.
I am.
But are you goat or fish? Are you goat or are you fish?
Goat or fish? I'm gonna go with goat.
Celebration
Yeah!
for goat! Celebration for goat! I goat! Crying goat! Crying goat! A mighty verses of crying. And the goat was crying to the fish, crying about the verses, crying about the verses. But it was not the crying of a fence and the goat. Where? I do not know if I am a goat or a fish. No. This was a crying of feeling goat versus fish. A crying of feeling goat versus fish. And it was a mighty verses of goat. It was a mighty verses of goat. Thank you. Always thank you, goat versus fish. Goat! It would not be goat versus fish if goat versus fish did not look at you right in the verses right now. Right now, goat. You should follow goat versus fish on the social media. Thank you. Let us do it now. Can it be done now, goat? Can it be done now, goat? You understand the verses? Always spreading the verses of goat versus fish. Of all goat and fish. Celebration.
Hello, Andy Van. We are looking at the verses before the fence times. Enjoy goat versus
You
fish.
never quite know if you are a goat or a fish until you hear the one-two question goat versus fish, and then it's all goat versus fish. Goat versus fish. First versus. The goat, follow the fish. The goat, follow the fish. That was within goat versus fish because it is goat versus fish. Singing, this will be goat versus fish. This will be goat versus fish. Celebration for goat. Celebration for goat.
Oh look, Tweety Goat, there is your own verses. There is your very own verses. There is your very own verses. You liked it, well we like you, celebration. Welcome to Goat versus Fish. We have been traveling back through the verses since before the fence times. Click on the very own verses. But first we wish to say hello to Andy Van 05. Andy Van 05, welcome to GoatFish. We are still celebrating GoatFish. Goat and fish and goat. You see the unification of GoatFish? Andy Van, since you made me laugh, may I make you laugh? Well, you may attempt to goat versus fish. You may attempt to goat versus fish. We cannot stop you from attempting to make Goat versus Fish laugh. And thank you for following Goat versus Fish. And Tweetiest Goat. Thank you for the bits. Thank you for 200 bits for Goat versus Fish. 200 bits for Goat versus Fish. You have earned this, Tweetiest Goat. 20 verses of Goat Fish. On the fourth verse of GoatFish, the goatfish gave to me 4 goat and fish, 3 goatfish, 2 goat and fish, and a goat versus a fish. Nah, looks fine. Does this have any consequence on mental health? Goat versus fish. The only consequence that you will have for your mental health is that you will be healthily thinking about GoatFish and Goat versus Fish and Goat versus Fish. Ooh, look at Goat versus Fish and look at Goat versus Fish. It is almost has been. Even in the fence times, it is just as much Goat versus Fish as it was before the fence times. Goat versus Fish. Goat versus Fish. Ooh, nice verses, Tweetiest Goat. Nice verses, Tweetiest Goat. Let us give it the verses. Celebration! Yes, Claire Brancatelli. Yes, we have heard of you. Tell us again if you're a goat or fish. And celebration to you, and celebration to you. Wally36, we love you, Goat versus Fish! And we love you as well, The love you give to the goatfish returns to you. It is a goat and fish unification. And SLR Jaded says, we love you, Goat versus Fish. Wow, what if they all just said, we love you, Goat versus Fish? Wouldn't that be a versus? Andy Van 05, if you want to try to laugh to make Goat versus Fish, you can try to make to laugh Goat versus Fish. We will not stop you. But we will do this versus on the 5th verse of GoatFish. We are not Goat versus fish. Maybe they are not quite ready for the 5th verse of GoatFish. Goat versus fish. Goat versus fish. Goat versus fish. Goat versus fish is going to ask you a poll. It's going to ask you a poll now. Now you may say, oh, goat versus fish, why don't you just decide the verses? Why? Because goat versus fish is going to ask you. So do you want to go to verses past or song of GoatFish? This is the question. Do you want to hear another song of GoatFish to keep the verses of GoatFish? Or do you want to go to verses past? Back to the verses. We just watched a back to the verses. We could watch another. Or we could sing a song of GoatFish. It is up to you. It is up to you. And of course, because we are giving you a choice to goat versus fish, we will allow you to choose the verses. Yes, we will allow you to choose the verses. Yes, for 5 bits, you can vote for 5 bits. And for 50 channel points, you can vote on the verses. It will be a 5-minute verses. The poll begins now. The poll begins now! The poll begins now. If you do not see the poll, refresh the verses, refresh the verses, refresh them. You know that little verses that goes around. Yes, refresh the verses, and then goat versus fish, and then goat versus fish can see the verses. Let us see. Goat versus fish. Charlie Brancatelli. I made my thoughts on what goat versus fish means, but I'm not sure I'm right based on that I'm a fish guy. Celebration for fish! Celebration for fish! Celebration for fish! How do you versus the goat? How do you versus the goat? You are a fish. How do you versus the goat? You are a fish. How do you versus the goat? Yes. And do not despair that you are feeling that you are not right. Because there is no wrong or right. There's only goat and fish. There's only goat and fish. Goat versus fish. Does lobster swim? Is lobster goat or fish? Begin by pondering if lobster is a goat or fish, and if it does swim, then it is probably fish. But there are goat that swim, and there are fish that don't swim. Goat versus fish was looking at a fish just last verses that walked on the land of the goat that is beneath the sea of the fish. It walked like a goat, but yet it was a fish. Oh, it was amazing verses. Jez Dave wants a song of GoatFish. And goat versus and Andy Van says is the video nothing inappropriate. It didn't let me send the link. Oh, you are trying to send linkage to goat versus fish. Well, goat versus fish. Goat versus fish. What a pitiable verses. What a pitiable verses. You are just going to have to try to make laugh goat versus fish by some other verses. Perhaps in the future verses we will allow you to send links to goat versus fish. Perhaps we will. Perhaps we shall, because then you could say, oh, goat versus fish, look at this verses, and then goat versus fish could make commentation upon the verses. Goat versus fish will attempt this verses, but for right now, that is not the verses, because swimming in my pond. Oh, you have a pond in which to swim! Regale us with tales of your pond. We want to hear all about your pond. And we also want to see the poll. How goes the poll? We have 10 to back to the verses and 3 for a song of GoatFish. But it's still anyone's verses. The verses are yours. Let us see how it goes. Goat are verses, the goat and the fish, and the goat and fish, and the goat and the fish, and the goat and fish, and the goat and the fish, and the goat and fish, and the goat. Goat versus fish. Goat and fish, and the goat and fish, and the goat and the fish, and the fish, and the goat and the fish, and goat and the fish, and the goat and the goat and fish, and the goat and the fish, and the goat and fish, and the fish, and the goat for the goat, well, the goat are versus, the goat are, oh, we wonder what is that versus? Well, the goat are versus fish. Goat and the fish, goat and the fish. We will learn that verses at another verses. There are so many verses to learn for goat versus fish. There's so many verses to learn for goat versus fish. But in any verses, they are still going. Back to the verses with 10 verses. Song of GoatFish with 3 verses. Goat versus fish will not take offense. Goat versus fish will not take offense if you don't want to hear another song of GoatFish. If you want to go back to the verses, let's go back to the verses. Let us see here. And Charlie Brancatelli, the fish. pond is made of green plants. I eat quite often and make you sleepy. Why care more about music than goats? The vote is almost done. The vote is almost done. We still have back to the verses, the 10 verses, Song of GoatFish with 3 verses. I'm not good at spelling. Can you spell goat versus fish? Can you spell goat versus fish? Try typing goat versus fish and spell goat versus fish. That would at least begin the beginning to help you to comprehend goat versus fish. Yes. Thank you, yes. And thank you, SLR Jaded, for loving goat versus fish. Nephew Quinn is rating with a party of 27. Nephew Quinn is rating with a party of 7. Nephew Quinn is rating with a party of 7. Celebration. And we have back to the verses, but we have Nephew Quinn first. We have Nephew Quinn with a party of 7. And we have goat versus fish. Goat versus fish. Welcomes to you. Welcomes to you, Nephew Quinn. Nephew Quinn. Where do we even begin? Oh, where do we even begin? With Nephew Quinn. First came the dirtiest of foggiest horns. Oh, like the horn of the goat, like the horn of a goat. And Dirty Foghorn said it was sensational. The nephewist Quinn said it was amazing. No, you haven't gone crazy. You haven't gone crazy. It's just goat versus fish. Let us give a verses. Let us give a verses to Nephew Quinn. Let us give a verses to Nephew Quinn. Celebration, celebration, celebration. Celebration, celebration. What is so amazing about goat versus fish? What is so amazing about goat versus fish? Well, goat versus fish. Well, the thing that is so amazing about goat versus fish is that it is just goat versus fish. That it is goat versus fish, and the fish are versus the goat, and the goat are versus the fish, and it is also goat versus fish. Just when you think, well, what is there else besides goat versus fish? Well, there's also goat versus fish. Wow, there's also goat versus fish. If you came here and you thought that you were going to see something that was not goat versus fish, then goat versus fish is here to show you, Nephew Quinn. We are speaking to Nephew Quinn. Nephew Quinn says it is amazing. What more do you need to see? What more do you need to see? Do you need to see more goat versus fish? Or we could give you more goat versus fish. We do have more goat versus fish. We have goat versus fish. We have goat versus fish, and we have goat. We have goat. We have goat. We have goat, and we have fish. We have goat and fish unification. We have goat and fish unification. This verse is yes. We are keeping the unification alive with goat versus fish. On the 5th verse of GoatFish, the goatfish give to me. Goat versus fish. 4 goat and fish, 3 goat fish, 2 goat and fish, and a goat versus a fish. Nephew Quinn, are you goat or are you fish? Nephew Quinn, are you goat or are you fish? There is none that comes before goat versus fish, the goatfish, without being asked the one true question of goat versus fish. Nephew Quinn, are you goat or are you fish? Dirty Foghorn, are you goat or are you fish? Are you goat or are you fish? Fish, the fish has fallen, the fish has fallen. It is a triumph of goat. The goat do triumph. Oh, goat versus fish, goat versus fish. We are still celebrating GoatFish. We are still celebrating GoatFish. We are still celebrating GoatFish. It's not yet the verses of goat and fish. It is not yet goat versus fish. It's not yet goat versus fish. We are still celebrating Versemas, and on Versemas we celebrate the unification of goat and fish. So let's help a fish, or we just replace the fish with another fish. Wow, it is the chunky fish. It is the chunky fish. Goat versus fish. But in many verses, this is goat versus fish. Now that you have rated goat versus fish and you are watching goat versus fish, You know, we wanted to give you some goat versus fish so that you could see that what the versus is all about. But now that you have seen goat versus fish, just come, relax, choose goat or fish. You know, be a little versus, have a conversation between goat and fish. You know, you may hear some musical celebrations of goat versus fish. We may go back to the verses to look at previous verses of goat versus fish. Yes, in verses, they just voted to say that they wanted to go back to the verses, or now there is 2 fish and a goat. Now there's 2 fish and a goat, and goat says, no, we want more goat. And so the goat says, we want more goat, we want equal verses on goat fish. How can you claim that it is goat fish unless it is equal goat and equal fish? Oh, very well, goat and the fish. And we have the goat and the fish, and then the other goat said, well, I'm a goat. I'm just as much goat as any goat. I want to be part of the goatfish. And so the goats joined the goatfish. The goats joined the goatfish. And then the fish said, but what about fish? But what about fish? Now there is one more goat than fish. I demand fish. I demand fish. I demand fish. Well, very well, fish. You can join the fishes. You can join the goatfish. Yes, it is a mighty unification of goat and fish. It is a mighty unification of goat and of fish. Yes, and then the goat said, but if we could just sneak another goat, perhaps we could make, you know, all goatfish are equal, but perhaps some goat are more equal than fish. Perhaps some goat are more equal than fish, said the goat to the fish. But just when you thought that it was going to be another goat, it was another fish. It was another fish. As the goats were searching for themselves, they're calling all goat. Then along came a fish. And then it was fish, and then there was one more fish than goat, and there was one more fish than goat, and it was it's beginning to look a lot like goatfish. Every single verse. Oh, come on, goat. Goat, where are you, goat? Goat, Quinn, are you the goat? Quinn, are you the goat? Are you the fish? Dirty foghorn for fish! Dirty foghorn for fish! Dirty foghorn. From night until morn. Dirty foghorn was a horny fish. Dirty foghorn is goat, oh you wish. For in the sea it goes splash, splash, splish, splish. Let's make some noise for the dirty foghorn. From night until morn, it is a fish, it is a fish. Celebration, always the horny fish. Oh yeah. Damn, this guy's really giving me all 4 winds of joy. Wind, goat, the wind. Is wind a goat or a fish? Vorbs with the fish, celebration for Vorbs the fish. And now let us see the verses. Dirty Foghorn has rated goat versus fish. Thank you to Nephew Quinn. If you do not follow Nephew Quinn, before the verses even begin, you should follow Nephew Quinn. Goat versus Fish is going to take a verses out of a very special verses to follow Nephew Quinn. Because if it weren't for Nephew Quinn, then we would still be here, and there would not be Nephew Quinn and Dirty Foghorn with Goat versus Fish. And we suspect that there are even others now. Goat versus fish. We do not have a shouting out. We make it by verses. Goat versus fish. Does that verses? Is that the verses? Do we have goat versus fish? This is goat versus fish. Do we have goat versus fish? Communication to Nephew Quinn. Are you goat or are you fish? And do we have communication to you? Goat versus fish. We go to the verses and Nephew Quinn. Celebration. We have communication, celebration. When you raid Goat versus Fish gives the verses to you. We promise the verses are true. And it is truly GoatFish. It is truly GoatFish. And celebration! But now, best singer ever. Oh yes, the best singer is Goat versus Fish. Now, Goat versus Fish. We said that we were going to look at verses past. We are going to look at verses past. And that goat is still making its absence known to goat versus fish. That goat, there is the goat. We have found the goat. We have found the goat. It is the goat. It is baby goata. It is baby goata. It is baby goata. And the goat also joined the verses, and it was goat and fish in unification. What more do you want from Goat vs. Fish? Follow Goat vs. Fish, subscribe to Goat vs. Fish, send your bits to Goat vs. Fish, and choose Goat or Fish, and just choose Goat or Fish already. But Goat vs. Fish. Mighty Goatfish to you. Now let us see. Let us see Goat vs. Fish. We are going to make a versus past from a versus past. Goat vs. Fish. Goat vs. Fish. Yes, let us look at this versus. Let us look perhaps at this versus. At the creation of the verses. Goat versus fish? Goat versus fish! This is the verses we must see. This is the verses that we must see. It must be goat versus fish. It must be goat versus fish. Goat versus fish. We are going to go to versus past. We are going to go to versus past. We are going to go to the Adult Swim Festiverses. The Adult Swim Festiverses of 2,018,000. The Adult Swim Festiverses of 2,018,000. Are you ready for Goat versus Fish? Are you ready for Goat versus Fish? We think you are. From before the fence times. From before the fence times. But even before the fence times, Goat versus Fish, we have told you many verses. Goat versus Fish does not sit on the fence. But Goat versus Fish can ride that fence. Goat versus Fish can ride that fence. We will not be defeated. We will not be defeated. Let us watch Fish. Let us watch Goat versus Fish ride that fence at the Adult Swim Festiverses. And look at the verses. Look at the verses. You can see Fish Nick Gibbons. You can see Fish Nick Gibbons. Nick Gibbons of the Adult Swim chose fish. You can see Sally Mae. You can see Sally Mae of the living streams of stupid morning bullshit that is no longer living because pitiably, AT&T fenced the Adult Swim streams. But there's the verses. And there's Goat versus Fish, and there's the Adult Swim Festiverses, and there is Frederick Armisen. Frederick Armisen is wearing a hat of goat. Is wearing a hat of goat. Celebration for Frederick Armisen that chose goat. Frederick Armisen that chose goat. Now let us watch the verses. Now let us watch the verses of Goat versus Fish from the ancient verses. You can see the goat has already fallen, but the fish was not soon after. Don't look at that versus. Don't look at that versus. No, false versus. No, false versus. No, bird versus bear is a false versus. Bird versus bear is a false versus. No, do not look at bird versus bear. No, bird versus bear. Bird versus bear is not a true versus. Bird versus bear, not a true versus. No. You did not see it. You did not see it. You did not see it. You saw nothing there. You saw no false versus here. You saw only goat versus fish. You did not just see bird versus bear. You did not just see bird versus bear. You forget that you saw that versus, and you just concentrate on goat versus fish. This is what you are looking at, goat versus fish. You did not see bird versus bear. You just saw goat versus fish. Not bird versus bear, but goat versus. Not bird versus bear, but goat versus fish. There is no bird, there's only goat and fish. Have you not heard that bird are false verses? Have you not heard that bird are false verses? Do we have to show you that bird are false verses? Bird are not real. Yes, you see, goat versus fish. We can learn. We already know that birds are not real. We already know this verses, because you can just go to see. You can go to see goat versus fish. It is a movement. It is a movement. Yes, we can see the verses. Yes, we can see birds. This is birdsaren'treal.com. And you can see that they have a versus bird, and it says bird watching goes both ways. Birds aren't real. Birds are not real. Yes, in case you did not know, birds aren't real. And also, I am a lie. False verses. I am a false verses. Yeah, so you can see that birds are not real. Who are we? The Birds Aren't Real movement has been active since 1976. Once a preventative cause, our initial goal was to stop the genocide of real birds. Unfortunately, that was unsuccessful, and the government has since replaced every living bird with robotic replicas. Now our movement prerogative is to make everyone aware of this verses. So you can see. Let us. Shall we watch the verses? Shall we watch the verses and see goat versus fish?
I shall resign the presidency effective at noon tomorrow.
We all remember where we were when that happened. But what if I told you that something far greater was at play in this very moment? A saga of government corruption so entrenched in our society that to expose it would make Watergate a mere footnote in the pages of history. For the last few years, my team and I have been investigating the biggest crime ever perpetrated on the American people. Since the Eisenhower administration, the U.S. government has been committing genocide on the entire bird population and replacing these birds with sophisticated robot replicas equipped with 5-megapixel cameras and a sophisticated tracking system that can follow your every movement. I know this is horrifying, but please remember, stay calm. It is estimated that by 2001, 90% of the birds that we see in the sky will actually be surveillance robots. We must act now to prevent this from going any further. Join us, and together we can make 1987 the year that we take back our freedom.
Well, there's the verses. Well, there is the verses. There's the verses for you. They're not real. Birds are not real. Birds are not real. There's only goat and fish. There's only goat and fish. And goat versus fish. Goat versus fish. Goat versus fish. Goat versus fish. Fish versus goat. Goat versus fish. And the goat and the fish, they are goat versus fish. And the goat of the land and the fish of the sea are goat versus fish. They are goat versus fish. Oh, see how that fence sitter sits up there up on the but the land and the sea are for goat versus fish. Oh, it's goat versus fish. Oh, it is goat versus fish. It's goat versus fish. It is goat versus fish. It's goat versus fish. It is goat versus fish. It is goat versus fish versus goat versus fish. I am goat versus fish. I am goat versus fish. Yes, the ones in the Birds Are Not Real movement are really doing a great contribution to goat versus fish. We hope you are still enjoying. We hope you are still not very hung over the fence from your Versmas celebrations. Yes, we like the celebrations, but Goat vs. Fish is also here to tell you to have a safe verse miss, and a safe verse miss means surrounding yourself by the fence, Ooh, Goat vs. Fish, when did you take this verses? When you said you wanted to be President Goat vs. Fish, you were not making a verses about fences, you were making a verses about promising all Goat to Fish to verses. Well, but some verses, you need the fence for protection. No, here comes the opposite. Oh, it is Fish versus Goat. Oh, I should have gone with President Fish versus Goat. If I'd gone with President Fish versus Goat, then Fish versus Goat would surely not have been advocating for fences, When I become president, then it will be Fish versus Goat. It will be a fish for every goat and a goat for every fish. No, it is a false versus. Fish versus Goat stole the election from Goat versus Fish. It wasn't an election. I was already president. I was president before you were president. No, I was the first versus. No, I was Fish versus Goat. No, I was Goat versus Fish. Goat versus Fish. Goat versus Fish. Goat and fish, fish and goat. Goat versus fish is the one simple rule. Goat versus fish should be taught in your school. A fish versus goat. Fish versus goat. Goat versus Fish. We have not seen much commentation on Goat versus Fish, but perhaps Goat versus Fish. Oh, they are Goat versus Fish. They are Goat versus Fish. Oh, we have caught up to the verses of Goat versus Fish. It is an interesting verses how many are here watching Goat versus Fish, and yet they are not chatting at Goat versus Fish. They must really just enjoy watching Goat versus Fish. Let us see how many are lurking with Goat versus Fish. We shall make a Twitch poll. Poll. Are you lurking? Goat and fish. Goat versus fish. Goat and fish. Are you lurking? The poll begins now. We shall have to see. If you are lurking in the verses. No, you cannot give us bits this verses. No, you cannot give us verses this verses. We just want to see. Are you lurking? And is the lurker a goat? Is the lurker a fish? Or is the lurker likely a fence sitter, not really wanting to commit to the verses? Perhaps they were ones that raided, the Revenites that raided Mr. Revan 7 and Nephew Quinn and Tweedious Goat, that they have been absent from their verses and now they are just looking upon it, or perhaps they're already dreaming. I'm dreaming of a goatfish that is neither black nor white, because there is no white or black. There is no white or black. Goat versus fish. No good, no evil, no plants, no people, and only goat and fish. I'm dreaming of a fenceless verse miss, just like the ones I used to show to all I know, be they fish or goat. I showed them the verses. I'm dreaming of a mighty like the fish would versus goat. No alpha, no omega. Fish on fins and goats on their legs. And always versus goat and fish, goat and fish, goat and fish. Goat versus fish, goat versus fish. Some verses such as this, some verses such as this. Yes, you know that verses, you know that verses. SLRJ did, I think you are my new favorite streamer. Goatfish, you are mighty goatfish. Oh, goatfish, you are mighty goatfish. Goatfish, you are mighty goatfish. Goatfish, you are mighty goatfish. And merry verses, fine verses we bring to all goat and fish. Fine verses for SLR Jaded and a mighty goatfish. There are 2 fish that have voted that they are fish. The rest are lurking, and now we are beginning to wonder. We're beginning to wonder how many are actually watching Goat vs. Fish. But we do not despair. We do not despair, because SLR Jaded says, I think you are my new favorite streamer. Celebration, celebration, celebration. Who was your old favorite streamer? Who was your old favorite streamer? Who has Goat vs. Fish? Who has Goat vs. Fish garnered this versus from? Who shall we thank for bringing you to Goat vs. Fish? Who shall we thank for bringing you to Goat vs. Fish? Now, of course, Goat vs. Fish. We want to direct you. We want to direct you to all the links of Goat vs. Fish. You may say, Goat vs. Fish, why are you taking time out of your verses to simply promote Goat vs. Fish? Well, Goat vs. Fish is always promoting Goat vs. Fish. But no, we do not have a fence bot to tell you. Get Goat vs. Fish. You get the verses directly from Goat vs. Fish. All links of Goat vs. Fish. All links of Goat vs. Fish. Goat vs. Fish on the Instagram, on the Book of Faces, on the Twitterverse, on the Cameo, on the Patreon, on TikTok even, Goat vs. Fish. Some verses are more active than others. Mostly it is here on the Twitch. But we want to see you following Goat vs. Fish in all verses. We want to see you following Goat vs. Fish in all verses. Thank you, Nephew Quinn. Thank you for rating Goat vs. Fish. Let us see who is still alive on the Twitch. Oh, some are still living on the Twitch, but it is mostly just Goat vs. Fish. Goat vs. Fish, we are reminiscing about those times before, about the pre-fence times. So we are going to see, what else can we see from before the fence times? Fence times? Goat vs. Fish, what can we see from before the fence times? Goat vs. Fish. Oh, that is a classic versus. We missed this. This is an amazing versus. This is a versus. Now, Goat vs. Fish is going to tell you all before we watch this versus. It begins very fence. It begins a bit fence. The versus begins a bit fence, but you will see that it really, really becomes Goat vs. Fish. It really becomes Goat vs. Fish. You just have to stay with the verses. It will begin fence, but we promise you. Or my versus isn't Goat vs. Fish. Which it is, because I am Goat vs. Fish. Because I am Goat vs. Fish. Buy the shirt of Goat vs. Fish. But we are going to look at the verses. We are going to look at this verses from verses past. And we are going to see secret verses with one Ryan Mitchell Gum. Goat vs. Fish. Oh yes, looking very fancy now, isn't it? You may look at this and you may say, how can this possibly become Goat vs. Fish? How can this fence become Goat vs. Fish? Well, you just watch Goat vs. Fish. You just watch Goat vs. Fish, and we are going to see some real verses. We will give you a moment of Goat vs. Fish to go into the chat and to declare if you think that this is really going to become Goat vs. Fish, or you think this is just going to remain fancy. And as for the poll of goat versus fish, it ended, but the last verses we saw, we did not see the poll, but we just saw 2 votes for fish. Celebration for fish, lurking fish, lurking fish. Very well, goat versus fish. Let us see, goat versus fish. 1s, 2s, 3s. Ah, just 3 verses, just 3 verses behind the verses. Celebration. Celebration! Let us watch this versus of goat versus. Celebration, yes, celebration. Let us see that verses again. We want to see that verses again. Let us see just how easily the fence can be toppled by just a little commitment to goat versus fish. Just a little commitment to goat versus fish. Let us see that. Truly amazing verses. Truly amazing verses. Now, goat versus fish. We want you really to appreciate this verses of goat versus fish. You know, we are here. Anything could happen around these fences. The fences could close in at any moment. But this does not deter Ryan Mitchell Gum from just yelling goat versus fish. Even when it looked as though there were no goat and fish abound and around. It may look to you that there is not even goat or fish around goat versus fish, but you should still yell goat versus fish. You should still just yell goat versus fish. You should still yell goat versus fish. But watch this versus, goat versus fish. Goat versus fish gives you this versus, whoa! Now you can see it, now we can really see a reaction to goat versus fish. Now goat versus fish, yes, we could have this versus, we could have this versus, we could have this versus. We could have this verses as well, and we can have this verses. We can have both verses, but let's try it in this verses. Let us try it in this verses. Why not try it in this verses? Well, look at this fish. Do you see how this fish is? This fish is. It is becoming part of the fence mystery. But let us try this verses. Just because it is goat versus fish. Just because it is goat versus fish, and it is never not the verses for another declaration of goat versus fish. Celebration. Celebration! That is what we call a bit of goat versus fish. That is what we call a bit of goat versus fish. Once upon a GoatFish. Once upon fish and the goat. The Wow. That was powerful verses. That was a powerful verses. It was. Casfey! SLRJ did, yes. That brought you out of the verses. You were just slumbering with goat versus fish, and then you thought, oh wow. That was a versus. Goat versus fish. After 8 hours of GoatFish last verses. And we are beginning to feel the fences. But there's still more to do. We are here to keep the verses of GoatFish. And that is what we shall do. Painful as it may be to let go of GoatFish, we will preserve it. We will preserve it for just a while longer. We shall sing you a song. We shall sing you a song, but not before taking us back to the past of goat versus fish again. Celebration for goat, celebration for goat, celebration for goat. Seventh facade, seventh facade! Seventh facade gave a gifted subscription of goat versus fish. It was silent verses, oh. A seventh facade gave a gifted tier 1 sub, gave 3, count them 3 gifted tier 1 subs. Seventh facade gave to Joy Toy Goat. seventh facade gave to Mr. Evan and 7. The seventh facade gave to fence sitter got out. And is that it for now? No, no, no. That is not it for now. DSR 115, DSR 115, keeping the mighty verses of GoatFish alive. Farewell, SLR Jaded. We are going to continue ushering in the GoatFish. And do not despair, it will be Goat versus Fish, it will be Goat versus Fish. Thank you for Goat vs. Fish being your new favorite streamer that is Goat vs. Fish. We look forward to seeing you out there in the verses. We look forward to seeing you out there in the verses. Celebration for SLR Jaded. And it is, it is not Mr. Goat vs. Fish. Simply Goat vs. Fish would be verses. Or in this versus, GoatFish. There is no good or evil, only goat and fish. A verse night to you as well. DSR 115 kept the verses alive. Oh, DSR 115 kept the verses alive. It's an easy thing to do, as long as you are willing to mash that button, subscribe. Goat versus Fish will take all of your time. But we suppose that is why you subscribe to Goat vs. Fish. Thank you to Seventh Facade for the gifted verses, to Goat vs. Fish. On this versus, Goat vs. Fish was rated by Tweediest Goat. Goat vs. Fish was rated by Mr. Rev 7. Goat vs. Fish was rated by Nephew Quinn. There's a powerful verses of Goat vs. Fish. Powerful verses of Goat vs. Fish. Goat vs. Fish is streaming to the Book of Faces and to the YouTube and to the Twitch. There are 28 viewing Goat vs. Fish on the Twitch. There are none viewing Goat vs. Fish on the Book of Faces. There are none viewing Goat vs. Fish on the YouTube. What a preposterous verses! Why is Goat vs. Fish even versing to stream out to all those places if they are not even there to watch Goat vs. Fish? Perhaps the ones that are on the Twitch, they are more virile. They are ready to be awakened to witness Goat vs. Fish, and the others are not. Goat vs. Fish. But yes, let us go back to one more verses, and then we will sing a song of celebration, and then Goat vs. Fish, and then Goat vs. Fish. Goat vs. Fish. Let us see the verses. Ah, Goat vs. Fish. This is a verses. This is a verses. Now this is a verses. Now if you are wearing headphonics, you may want to mind the verses. This may be a bit loud in the verses. There's only Goat vs. Fish. There's no fence. Celebration. So Goat vs. Fish. Yes, we are going to share the verses of Goat vs. Fish. And we are going to share the verses of Goat vs. Fish. And we are going to Goat vs. Fish. Share the verses. Are you ready for a little bit of Goat vs. Fish? You say there is no fence. So Goat vs. Fish agrees with you. But some verses the fence sitter tried to make a very convincing verses that there is such a thing that is not a goat or a fish. Let us find. You see, you tried to do a verses with a fence sitter and you cannot even hear the verses. Goat vs. Fish. Reverses, verses again, do the verses again. Goat versus fish. Verses again. Goat versus fish. 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 What is this place? Place of land? Place of much land, yes. Ah. What of this one? You. Goat versus fish speaks to you. One of the land. You seem to be of the land, yes. Perhaps you are a goat. Perhaps you are a fish that has come to the land of the goat of verses. Are you goat or fish? Are you goat or are you fish? Why will you not say if you are a goat or a fish? Are you a fence sitter? And that was the verses, and that was the verses. What do you think, DSR115? Do you think it was a goat or do you think it was a fish? Do you think it was a goat? Do you think it was fish? It is goat versus fish. Feeling verses. You are looking so festive as requested. It's a mighty unification of goatfish. Silly goatfish, they are prancing about. And they give us a shout, merry goatfish, goatfish, goat and fish, goat and fish, fish and goat, it's goat versus fish. Celebration. Celebration. Felicitation. Goat versus fish! Thank you, Denna, for lurking in the verses. Thank you, Denna, for lurking in the verses. Now, was it goat or fish? Was it goat or fish? They may perhaps reveal their place in future, but difficult to say. Goat versus fish agrees. Goat versus fish agrees. Some goat would be eager to claim that it is a goat, but if you really get into the verses, you can see that there's actually quite a bit of fish about it, and it really could have been fish. Denna, did you see the verses? Did you see the verses where we asked it if it was goat or fish just a verses ago? We could verses again. We could always verses again. We have just been going back into the verses. We have been going back into the verses. We have been going back into the verses. Goat versus fish. Let us watch this verses. This is a very pleasant verses. Now in this verses, Goat versus Fish is speaking to this is Goat versus Fish at WonderCon 2018. Now WonderCon was a very amazing versus. WonderCon was a very amazing versus 2018 for Goat versus Fish. Of course, we had felt Goat versus Fish. We had felt Goat versus Fish for many verses. It had been Goat versus Fish. But at WonderCon 2018, Goat versus Fish, we really hit our verses. If it was a goat, you might say the stride of the goat. If it was a fish, you might say that it was really making a wake. It was really making a wake behind it. Such a powerful moving fish. Goat versus Fish was just really being Goat versus Fish. Goat versus Fish. Ask you, are you goat or fish? Follow Goat versus Fish. You follow Goat versus Fish. There was one versus where over 100 followed Goat versus Fish on the social media in just one versus. In just one versus. That is how Goat versus Fish. That is how you have found Goat versus Fish. One by one, Goat versus Fish communicates to you. Goat versus Fish communicates. Are you goat or fish? Are you goat or fish? One by one with Goat versus Fish. But in recent verses, it has become 2s by 3s and even 4s by Goat versus Fish because they have come to raid Goat versus Fish. And some of you are spreading the verses of Goat versus Fish on your own. But in any verses, Let us look at this very teachable verses of Goat versus Fish from Wondrous Con 2018, when Goat versus Fish spoke to a small one about Goat versus Fish. Tell us if you can hear Goat versus Fish when we begin the verses.
Oh, there is a place to learn about fishing. Yes, Goat versus Fish would like to go to this place just to learn. Always learning more of the goat.
Then you have to go
There's the guy who was killed.
first grade, then second grade, third grade,
Like,
fourth grade, fifth
he
grade,
went that way.
in college.
Are there many goat and fish in these grades, as you call them? Would Goat versus Fish find other goat and fish there?
No.
Then Goat versus Fish is not very interested in going to a place where there are not any goat or fish. Yes, Goat versus Fish is always looking for goat and fish.
But you can learn.
Ah, you can learn of the goat and fish. Yes, and who does help Goat versus Fish to learn? Who helps Goat versus Fish to learn? Ah, a teacher you call it. Yes, a teacher, yes. And is a teacher a goat or a fish? It is neither goat nor a fish. How could it teach so much about goat and fish if it is not a goat or a fish? Goat versus Fish does not understand it. Ah, they know very much. Yes, they know very much. Yes, one who knows much about goat and fish is would be considered very smart. Yes, goat versus fish. Yes. Do you think goat versus fish should go to this school? Do you think so?
Celebration. Goat and fish and goat and fish. The teacher is a fence sitter. Well, perhaps the teacher was a goat or a fish. You are not accusing Goat versus Fish of being the fence sitter and teaching it when it was teaching the small one about Goat versus Fish. And Goat versus Fish is still in communication with that one. Not with that. Well, there was one, and then there was another one that was taking the verses. And that one they say, "Oh, thank you, Goat versus Fish. We are such fans of Goat versus Fish." And recently, yes, it is communication. It is communication. Casfe with the hype versus celebration. Oh, no, the verses go on. We are getting used to this verses, and we think we could use more verses of Goat versus Fish. We think we could use more verses of Goat versus Fish. Let us see what we can see. Yes, there's Goat versus Fish. There is Goat versus Fish. There is Goat. Ooh, there is Goat versus Fish. Goat and fish and 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 goat versus fish. Oh, it is frankly speaking caliendo. Goat versus fish. Why not a little bit of this verse?
Goat versus Fish is all.
Why not a little bit of the verses of frankly speaking caliendo? Yes, Goat versus Fish encountered this one. Perhaps you recognize frankly speaking caliendo? Perhaps you recognize this one? Look at the mightiness of Goat versus Fish. Goat versus Fish was looking very mighty, that versus. Yes, frankly speaking caliendo, it is often doing impersonation. It makes itself sound. It makes itself sound as if it is one that it is not, and Goat versus Fish. How long has the verses of Goat or Fish been lasting for? In the beginning there was Goat versus Fish. In the beginning there was Goat versus Fish. You are just going to have to accept that verses. In the beginning there was Goat versus Fish. Oh, you wish to know. But isn't the mystery of Goat versus Fish just so tantalizing? Yes. In the beginning there was Goat versus Fish. Phoenix Fan Fusion 2019. Let us see what frankly speaking caliendo. Do you know who this one is? It is on Fox Sprots, and it used to have a verses. It used to have a mighty verses, and now Goat versus Fish has found it, and it has found Goat versus Fish, and we did a verses, Let the
Always goat versus fish. It's always goat versus fish, and you seem to be always a fence sitter.
That's Goldblum versus fish. Yes, Lord. Why goat versus fish? How many verses do you see?
Never gonna choose a goat, never gonna choose a fish, never gonna choose a goat or fish. Goat versus fish cannot be broken.
Except for by my new character, fish versus goat. The fish versus goat, I say! I understand where a man can play. We understand what we do, but the goat versus fish, the fish versus goat in a universe where we not know the most. We find where we play, we do every day, and we understand where we might be this way. And by the way, I'm a wall sitter, not a fence sitter.
We can watch the stream that just happened. Wow, amazing verses. Thank you, Goat versus Fish. That was a nice verses. That was a nice verses, wasn't it, Goat versus Fish? And then, frankly speaking, Caliendo invited Goat versus Fish. It was all before the fence times. It was all before the fence times. Fern6728, you are back, Fern6728. You missed several verses. You missed several verses. How many verses have you seen? How many verses did you see, Fern6728? We could show you the verses again. We could show you the verses again. Goat versus Fish was just showing verses from verses past, and if you missed the verses, we could show you the verses. It was an amazing verses. It was an amazing verses. Can we watch our own living stream within the living stream of Goat versus Fish? We believe we can. Let us do a little verseception. Let us do a little verseception. A little more verse, miss. Share the verses. If we can. Let us do a little verseception. Let us do a little verseception. A little more verse, miss. Share the verses. Share the verses. Share the verses. Yes, yes. This is good. Amazing verses. Amazing verses. Amazing verses. Share the verses. Goat versus verses. Share the verses. Yes, yes. This is amazing verses. Amazing verses. Amazing verses. This is goat versus verses. Goat versus yes, yes. This is amazing verses. Amazing verses. Amazing verses. They're watching the verses. They're watching the verses. Yes, yes. This is amazing verses. Amazing verses. They're watching the verses. They're watching the verses.
Gold versus fish. 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 Gold versus fish.
Goat versus
City fences, busy fences, dress in Versailles Day style. Then the air is a feeling of Versailles. Goats are laughing, fish are passing, they are meeting with smile. And on every fence corner you hear Versy bells, Versy bells. It's Versailles time, fancy sitter. Creaky creak, squeaky squeak. Soon it will be Versailles Day. Thank you for joining GoatFish. Thank you for joining GoatFish. It is so pleasant to have you here to bring in the GoatFish in this rare verse of unification. Strings of fence lights, even stop lights, they blink a bright red. Goat versus fish. Strings of fence lights, even stop lights, they blink bright black and white, but there's no black and white, only goat and goatfish. Hear the snow crunch and the fence bunch. This is GoatFish big scene, and you wonder what all of it means. Goat and fish, goat and fish. It's fence miss time, getting city. Creaky creak, squeaky squeak. Soon it will be Versailles Day. Goat and fish. Goat and fish. It's Versailles time in the city. Squeaky squeak. Creaky creak. Soon it will be Versmas Day. Soon it will be Versmas Day. Soon it shall be. Soon it shall be. Goat versus fish. Soon it shall be. Goat versus fish. Soon it shall be. Goat versus fish. Soon it shall be. Difficult verses. Soon it shall be Versmas Day. Fancy bells, fancy bells. It's Versmas time in the verses. Squeaky squeak. Creaky creak. Soon it will be Versmas Day. Thank you, Fern, for 45 cheers for the GoatFish. That is 1, 2, 3, 4, and an extra verses for 5 million bits from Fern. What just fell off of GoatFish? Why? Both goat and fish fell off of GoatFish. Both goat and fish fell off of GoatFish. It looks like GoatFish is not ending after all. It looks like GoatFish is not ending after all. GoatFish can be maintained. GoatFish can be maintained. It is still feeling a lot like GoatFish. And so we will part with you, skipping now to the 12th verses. On the 12th verse of GoatFish, the GoatFish gave to me 12 fish and goat, 11 goat and fish, 10 goat and fish, 9 goat and fish. Fence sitters! 7 goat and fish, 6 goat and fish, goat versus fish. Fish, 3 goat fish, 2 goat and fish, and a goat versus a fish. Well, that has been goat versus fish. That has been goat versus fish. Goat and fish in their versus day style. What do I do? What do you wish? What do I do? What do you wish? What is it? My master! What do I do? What do you wish? Well, we were just thanking you for cheering to 245 to goat versus fish. What zone are you in? What is the timing of your zone, Fern6728? We wonder. Are you just beginning your verses now as goat versus fish? No, but you were here earlier in the verses, and then you left the verses, and then you returned to goat versus fish. Tell us, Fern6728. What do you wish? What does goat versus fish wish? Goat versus fish? Goat versus fish has always ever had 3 wishes. And this versus, we may change the verses next verses because we are goat versus fish, and as long as we change the verses, as long as it is still goat versus fish because it is goat versus fish. We can change the verses and they are always goat versus fish. Goat versus fish has said since the beginning of goat versus fish. 3 verses. Choose goat or fish. Follow goat versus fish. And ask one you know if they are goat or if they are fish. Now we may have other verses. We may say, oh, we wish you to purchase goat versus fish. Oh, we wish you to subscribe to goat versus fish. We wish for you to give the bits to goat versus fish. But all of that verses will come to goat versus fish. That verses will come to goat versus fish. The most important verses of goat versus fish is to spread the verses of goat versus fish. And then when the goat and fish come to goat versus fish and even a fence sitter, we give them the celebration that is GoatFish, the celebration that is goat versus fish. So they want to return again to goat versus fish. The rest of those verses, they will come to goat versus fish and do verses. Choose goat or fish, you have already done this, Fern. Follow goat versus fish, you have already done this, Fern. Ask one you know if they are goat or fish, Fern. Spread the verses of goat versus fish. That is the 3rd verses. Choose. Follow. Spread. Choose goat or fish. Follow goat versus fish. Spread the verses of goat versus fish. And Fern, you already do this for goat versus fish. You do this, Fern, and so much more for goat versus fish. You do this and so much more for goat versus fish, Fern. And it is goat versus fish that must give you what you wish, goat versus fish. How long it took for you to receive the shirt of goat versus fish. Oh, it weighs upon goat versus fish. It weighs upon goat versus fish. In these fence times, it became fancy. They made a promise to goat versus fish. Goat versus fish made a promise to you. Celebration. Celebration, Fern. Celebration. Goat versus fish. A promise was made to goat versus fish. A promise was made to you by goat versus fish. But then they were late in the verses. But now goat and fish are here with goat versus fish. Now we have the shirts of goat versus fish. And you have received the shirts of goat versus fish. And it is a celebration. And we are thanking you so much for your patience with goat versus fish. You may have thought, oh, goat versus fish, not serious verses. It takes our verses and it gives us nothing. It makes us wait for goat versus fish. But you believed in goat versus fish, and you received goat versus fish, and goat versus fish believes in you. Choose goat or fish. Follow goat versus fish. Spread the verses of goat versus fish. What is the wish of goat versus fish on Versmiss? You have heard it. It is the same as every verses. It is the same as every verses. It is the same as every verses. Goat and fish. Goat and fish. In unification. Trying to get a friend to add you. Do you succeed, Fern? Do you succeed, Fern? Goat vs. Fish is here. Goat vs. Fish is live on the Twitch, and there are 26 watching Goat vs. Fish. There is one that is live. It is Teddy Boo 14. It is Raheel Deal. The most that are live now, they are watching Goat vs. Fish. It is really late in the verses now. We could just continue as Goat vs. Fish. We could just continue as Goat vs. Fish, and then when they come to Goat vs. Fish, they will see that it is Goat vs. Fish. But we have been celebrating Versmiss. We have been celebrating Versmiss for a long verses. Last verses, we did almost 9 hours. We did 9 hours of GoatFish. 9 hours of GoatFish celebration. We have given you so much GoatFish, so much goat and fish. And we will give you more. Goat vs. Fish had an absence, but that's because Goat vs. Fish was setting up to stream also to the Book of Faces and to the YouTube, where none are watching Goat vs. Fish, but also to have the power to stream to you, to show you versus past on the YouTube of Goat vs. Fish. And now we do it, and now we do it, and now we did it, Fern, with the fish. Celebration for fish, celebration for fish. How goes the verses, Fern? Have you gotten your friend to add goat versus fish? It is not that we are impatient with you. We are so curious with anticipation, Fern. If you got one to add goat versus fish. Oh, goat versus fish. Moon metaphysics. Moon metaphysics. We did not see the verses. We did not see the verses. Moon metaphysics. Oh, Moon metaphysics subscribes to goat versus fish. Questita says, Jesus, is that you know it is goat versus fish. Moon Metaphysics, thank you for subscribing to Goat. We need to send it to private verses. Moon Meta. Physics. If you do not follow Moon Metaphysics, you should follow Moon Metaphysics. You should follow Moon Metaphysics. Goat and fish. Moon Metaphysics. Moon Metaphysics follows Goat versus Fish. And now we tell you to follow Moon Metaphysics. Yes, you were asking. Celebration. This is what you do for Goat versus Fish. This is what you do for Goat versus Fish. And this is why we celebrate you, Fern. This is why we celebrate you, Fern. We are watching your video. Celebration for Goat versus Fish. Celebration for Fern. Celebration for Fern. A new follower of Goat versus Fish. A new follower by way of Fern for Goat versus Fish. Thank you, Fern. And thank you, Questita, for following Goat versus Fish. Moon Metaphysics rated Goat versus Fish. Rated Goat versus Fish with five verses. 5 verses. And we must thank it for the raid as well. We must thank it for the raid as well. Some verses we miss the verses because Goat versus Fish is so busy being Goat versus Fish. And for raiding Goat versus Fish, we have shouted you out many verses. And that is a perfect verses. That is a perfect verses. You have a new follower. Celebration. Celebration. Goat versus Fish cannot think of what one we would want more than just one more new follower of Goat versus Fish. But one more follower of Goat versus Fish. Jason TZ, we mean on the Twitch. Watching your videos with a friend. Watching your videos with a friend. Celebration. Well, this is quite an easy verse. Goat versus Fish can just look about and see. Can just look about and see how go the verses. Can look about and see how go the verses. The versus is ended, and we are just here with Fern, and it is just you and Goat versus Fish, and whoever else is still lurking with Goat versus Fish. We suspect they sleep now, and are still here just listening to the jingle-jangle of Goat versus Fish. When you arise, you will follow Goat versus Fish. When you arise, you will subscribe to Goat versus Fish. Yes, you will ask all you know if they're goat or fish, and you will choose Goat or Fish. This is a subliminal versus of Goat versus Fish. This is a subliminal versus of Goat versus Fish. Choose Goat or Fish, follow Goat versus Fish. Spread the verses of Goat versus Fish. Goat versus Fish. Goat versus Fish. Well, Fern 6728, this has been a versus of Goat versus Fish. When Goat versus Fish looks on the Twitch, there are only two that are alive now. But why don't we raid one? Why don't we raid one that is just waiting for Goat versus Fish? Yes? Goat versus Fish thinks we shall. Goat versus Fish thinks we shall. That video with the kid made me tear up. Oh, Goat versus Fish. Oh, Goat versus Fish. Oh, Goat versus Fish. Now, you make Goat versus Fish want to watch that versus again. Teachable verses. Teachable verses of Goat versus Fish. Christian asks, what wins Goat or Fish? What wins Goat or Fish? Well, you can tell it. Two verses, you can tell it. Well, first, is it Goat or Fish? First, ask it if it is Goat or Fish. Now, if it has chosen Goat or Fish, then we can speak about what wins Goat or Fish. But ask it if it is Goat or if it is Fish. Which it tells you if it is Goat or Fish. If it says it is Goat, then you can say, well, you are a goat. Do you win against the fish? If it says it is fish, you are a fish. Do you win against the goat? And you can see what it say, Now, if it is sitting on the fence, that is a whole other verses. If it is sitting on the fence, you may say, you wish to see who does win. You wish to see who does win before you choose. Oh, you are one of those fence sitters that is just waiting to see who does triumph, and then to the last verses you join who does triumph. Or are you one who wishes to see if the underdog is a goat or if the underdog is a fish, and determine if the dog is a goat or a fish, and then they join that verses. Is winning so important? Is it? Well, we are speaking of winning because this one is asking. Fern asks, one that is called Christian, to whom it spreads the verses, wants to know what wins goat or fish. It would be on the verses of Christmas, as you do call it, that ones would be asking. One's named Christian would be asking, who does triumph, the goat or the fish? Well, we can ask you, is winning so important? We have a new fence sitter. Oh, Fern. We have a fence sitter, but we thought that perhaps we did have a new fence sitter, because even as you were enjoying Goat versus Fish, we wonder, where did it follow Goat versus Fish? Was it on the Instagram? Was it on the Twitterver? Was it on the Twitch? Was it on the Book of Faces? Or do you just mean that they follow Goat versus Fish because they like Goat versus Fish? We understand that it is follow Goat versus Fish. And we celebration to you, even for this fence sitter, because at least the fence sitter, we can say this versus, at least the fence sitter has heard of Goat versus Fish. At least the fence sitter has heard of Goat versus Fish, and has heard the one true question. We can say this, at least, of the fence sitter. Can we say that the only certain thing is that nothing is certain in the Goat versus Fish? You can say it if you wish, but one thing is certain. It is Goat versus Fish. Even On GoatFish, even as we celebrate GoatFish, it's still goat versus fish. Because in the beginning there was goat versus fish, the GoatFish, and goat versus fish said that there should be goat and that there should be fish. Nothing is certain in goat versus fish. You can be certain of goat versus fish. You can be certain of goat versus fish. And what of you? Are you goat or fish? Charlie Brancatelli, did you not say that you were fish? We thought you said you were fish, but are you certain that you are fish? Perhaps you are goat. Charlie Brancatelli, if you're on the Book of Faces, go to facebook.com. Oh, no, you were on the Twitch. You're on the Twitch celebration for Twitch. Never mind that versus. Stay here with goat versus fish. But Fern was saying that the verses with the small one brought it to tears, and goat versus fish just likes being a real tearjerker, so we're just going to watch the verses again. An impromptu interview at Politicon with goat versus fish. You could hear nothing. You could hear nothing. You could hear nothing. False verses. False verses. False verses. But yes, well now you can hear goat versus fish, but the verses is that we want this verses and we want to share the verses, yes.
Fish.
Goat versus fish. Yes, I
Can
am
you hear
goat
the verses?
versus
Can
fish.
you hear
I'm
the-
goat versus fish.
Tell me more about your name, Goat versus Fish.
Well, goat versus fish is the forever verses of all goat and all fish. Look about you, and you will see all the goat and fish. Yes, some have not yet chosen goat or fish, but it is all goat versus fish. I
Can
am
you hear the
unity and
verses, Vern?
disunity
Can you
of
hear
goat
the
and
verses?
fish, and I am goat versus fish.
Is there no possibility for GoatFish?
The unity of goatfish. Do you seek the unity of goat and fish?
I inquire as to the possibility.
The unity of goatfish can be achieved by a goat and fish, but only if they both dispense with the verses and choose to form the unity of the goatfish. Just as this Politicon, there was a goat and a fish that did form the unity of the goatfish. It was very splendid verses. But if even one goat or fish does not wish to form the unity of the goatfish, then it is a versus. It is goat versus fish.
Do you think that we are predisposed to choose verses?
Well, it is goat versus fish. It is all goat versus fish. Now, if one is predisposed to choose goat or fish, well, goat versus fish is trying to find this as well. Very curious about all the ones such as you, if they are goat, if they are fish. But goat versus fish does not know. That is why goat versus fish asks, are you goat or are you fish? Are you goat or fish?
I'm not sure how I would determine that.
It comes from within you. It is not for goat versus fish to say, yes. Some look at the verses of evidence. They say, oh, I enjoy frolicking on the land or swimming in the sea, and they choose goat or fish for these verses. Others, they simply know it deep within their very verses if they are goat or fish. But these are your verses. Yes, continue. What do you have to say to goat versus fish?
I'm a terrestrial being. I walk upon the ground. But I know that in my evolutionary past, there is also aquatic ancestry.
Interesting verses.
Yeah, so I remember scuba diving and feeling very vulnerable and out of sorts because I couldn't see what was behind me and I couldn't easily turn to see what was behind me.
Can you usually see what is behind you?
Well, I can easily turn
Yes.
and see what is behind me when I'm planted on dry ground. But in the water, it's not so easy and I feel uncomfortable.
It could be a versus of goat. It could be goat for you, yes. The goat do go to the sea to versus the fish. If this is so, that is pleasant that you go to see the fish. But perhaps you are a fish that has been trapped on the land of the goat, seeking to be among the fish, which is why you went to the fish. It could be those verses.
How would I know?
It is for you to say. It is only for you to say. You will know when you are a goat, when you say that you are a goat, and then you become a goat. Or a fish. Now, you said that in previous verses, in verses long past, perhaps you were a fish. Perhaps you were a fish. Perhaps you were a fish, and then you became a goat. Or perhaps you were a goat, and then you became a fish. You can be goat, and then you can choose fish, but you cannot be goat and fish in the same verses. Yes, in this verses, you choose goat or fish.
But the verses is not a given. There is the possibility of the unity.
I am goat versus fish, the goatfish, the unity and disunity of goat and fish. It is always goat versus fish, the goatfish.
I see.
Yes, you are beginning to learn the verses.
Maybe I'm speaking words that indicate that I'm beginning to understand, but I'm not. I'm not.
That is typical of
Fanciness!
Goat versus fish. Goat versus fish suspects that you do not understand goat versus fish because you have not yet chosen goat or fish. But at this verses, many are speaking of voting, yes? Mm-hmm. Now, goat versus fish, yes, do you vote goat, do you vote fish? But what is it these other verses that the ones are speaking of? Some have spoken of Demlicans or Republic. What are these goat and fish that the ones also speaking of, the goat versus fish?
Typically, we're called upon to choose Democrat or Republican.
And this is goat versus fish?
Could be fish versus goat, I'm not sure. I don't know how they map.
I heard one that said a Democrat was a goat. Goat versus fish is not here to say it, but one did say, one that was a goat said Democrat was a goat. So that is one evidence for goat. We shall see. It is a long verses ahead.
Yes, I tend to vote Libertarian.
What sort of verses are these? Tell us of the libertarian, if it is a goat or a fish.
Well, Libertarians come in a variety of flavors, but an easy way to say it is that they tend to agree with conservatives and Republicans on financial matters and economic matters, and they tend to agree with Democrats and liberals on social matters. So Libertarians believe that the drug war should be ended, but they also believe that the welfare state should be ended.
What should be continuing?
What should be continuing is individual...
Other than goat versus fish. Of course, we always
Of course.
continue goat versus fish.
Individual initiative, entrepreneurial initiative. I think many libertarians, not me, but many libertarians place a very high value on contracts. So agreements that people enter into voluntarily, they hold those as
And
being
yet it
almost
does not
sacred.
agree to choose
Again,
goat or
that's not my
fish.
particular brand of libertarianism, but it needs to be included when describing what libertarians are.
Yes, that is, you are speaking of GoatFish, yes, when the goat and the fish, yes, they must both agree to form the unity of the GoatFish. They must agree to do it. They must agree to do it.
It seems they don't very often agree.
They do seek verses. It is the way of the goat to versus the fish. It is the way of the fish to versus the goat. Now, goat versus fish is always pleasant to see a goat versus a fish because it is goat versus fish. But I am goat versus fish, the goatfish, and sometimes the goatfish does like to see the unity of goat and fish, yes.
There is no indication of unity on your headgear, though, but there is the verses.
There is the verses, yes, there is the verses, yes. There is always goat versus fish. And as far as the one...
Yes, back in that verses, the unity of goatfish was not yet to be perceived, It was only goat versus fish in that verses. And it was in that verses that we knew we needed the unification of goat and fish to be right there on the verses of goat versus fish. It was in this verses. It said, there is no indication of goat fish on your verses. It said to goat versus fish, and goat versus fish. Of course, we continue goat versus fish. But we knew that I am goat versus fish, the goat fish, the unity, and this unity of goat and fish. And we need representation of goat fish on the verses. And that is why we have goatfish, It is not why there is goatfish. It has always been goatfish. It has always been goat versus fish, the goatfish. But that is how we now perceive goatfish. So you can thank this fence sitter if you wish. And as for Charles Lee Brancantelli, yes, of course, it is for you to choose goat or fish. Now, it may be that you think that it is within yourself that you have always been goat or fish, and this is a fine verses. You may say, I did not choose goat or fish. I am a goat or a fish. But we would then ask you to choose to accept that you are a goat or a fish. For some may say, I am a goat, but I reject my own goatness, or some such verses. Or some say, I do not have to choose goat because I simply am a goat. But we would say, even if you know you are a goat, you should still choose goat because it is you to choose goat or fish. It is the power of the choosing the goat, choosing the fish, accepting that you are goat or fish, being the goat and fish, being in unification, or being verses.
Ones you say you celebrate the ones that are out there spreading their own verses, yes, bringing their verses to all the ones, yes. That is what goat versus fish is doing. I am being goat versus fish. I am here to spread the verses of goat versus fish. It is at goat vs fish on all social media, the Instantgram, the Book of Faces, the Twitterver, yes, and the Goat vs. Fish podcast. Yes, you can even hear the Goat vs. Fish podcast. It is recorded at the Comedy Store Los Angeles. It is the place of Goat vs. Fish. You should follow Goat vs. Fish. Once you listen.
Should follow Goat vs. Fish.
Thank you, yes. That is the most Goat vs. Fish verses that you have had this whole verses. But, are you...
Let us hear that again. After all that verses, it says, I should follow goat versus fish. Now it is beginning to sound like goat versus fish.
It's goat versus fish. And as far as the ones you say you celebrate the ones that are out there spreading their own verses, yes, bringing their verses to all the ones, yes. That is what Goat vs. Fish is doing. I am being Goat vs. Fish. I am here to spread the verses of Goat vs. Fish. It is at Goat vs. Fish on all social media, the Instantgram, the Book of Faces, the Twitterver, yes, and the Goat vs. Fish podcast. Yes, you can even hear the Goat vs. Fish podcast. It is recorded at the Comedy Store Los Angeles. It is the place of Goat vs. Fish. You should follow Goat vs. Fish. Once you listen.
Should follow Goat vs. Fish.
Thank you, yes. That is the most Goat vs. Fish verses that you have had this whole verses. But,
hello, so-called sarcastic panda.
Are you goat or are you fish? Final verses.
I cannot commit.
It is a fence sitter. Ooh, it is a fence sitter. Well, goat versus fish knows just what to do. With this one. Just one versus. Fence fence-sitters, always being so positive.
Goat versus fish. 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 It is a raid. It is a raid. It is a late raid. It is a late raid of X Nokia. Raiding with a party of 6. Raiding with a party of 6 celebration. A fresh mint, welcome a fresh mint to Goat versus Fish. Let's just get just a little more Goat versus Fish. Let's just get just a little more Goat versus Fish. Welcome a fresh mint, welcome so-called sarcastic panda. Welcome Z-Subtle again. Welcome to the raid of Goat versus Fish. To the raid of Goat versus Fish. Ooh, it is Goat versus Fish. It is Goat versus Fish. So-called sarcastic panda with the winged fish, with the beautiful winged fish, the beautiful winged fish. Just look at that versus, just look at that fish. And look at all the goat and fish that are here, forming the mighty unification of Goat versus Fish. Wow, amazing verses. Amazing verses. Z-Subtle, Z-Subtle, celebration for Z-Subtle, celebration for Z-Subtle, celebration for so-called sarcastic panda, and celebration for X Nokia, who raided with a party of 6. And yet X Nokia is not here chatting away with Goat versus Fish. We wonder if X Nokia is a goat or a fish. We wonder if X Nokia is a goat or if it is a fish. Celebration for the raid. Celebration for the raid. Celebration for the raid. Oh, Goat versus Fish. We will ask X Nokia. We will just do a little celebration. Just a little celebration. We are asking X Nokia. We are asking X Nokia. We are asking X Nokia. Asking, yes, that is one that rated Goat versus Fish, yes. Goat versus X Nokia. We are asking X Nokia. We are asking X Nokia. Asking X Nokia if it's goat or it's fish. Fish, fish, fish. Goat or fish, goat or fish, goat or fish. Goat or fish. Are you goat or are you fish? These are the verses of Goat versus Fish. Let's go Goat. X Nokia, celebration for Goat. Celebration for Goat. X Nokia is Goat, X Nokia is Goat. And you know what that means for Goat versus Fish? Do you know what that means for Goat versus Fish? That means goat. 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 That means goat.
One time my dad.
False verses. No, false verses. False verses. False verses. No. Elimination. No. You don't see that verses. No. Just a bit of Goat versus Fish. Just Goat versus Fish. Just a bit of Goat versus Fish. There is no need for you to witness that verses. There is no need for you to witness.
Off the stage.
But there is a verses for you to witness. Goat. Oh, it is dressed like a fence sitter. It is dressed like a little fence sitter. Oh, sleepy goat, sleepy goat. Oh, here comes the fish, here comes the fish. The fish wants to versus the goat, the fish wants to versus the goat. There is no good or evil, only goat and fish. Oh, look at that fence sitter, ha ha ha. Goat versus fence sitter, no, maybe it's a fish. It is a catfish. The goat versus the catfish, the goat versus the catfish. Goat versus fish, it is goat versus catfish, it is goat versus catfish. Celebration for goat, celebration for goat, celebration for goat. But we were watching the interview with Goat versus Fish, and we should see the end of
That is what Goat versus Fish is doing. I am being Goat versus Fish. I am here to spread the verses of Goat versus Fish. It is at Goat vs Fish on all social media. The Instantgram, the Book of Faces, the Twitterver, yes. And the Goat vs. Fish podcast. Yes, you can even hear the Goat vs. Fish podcast. It is recorded at the Comedy Store Los Angeles. It is the place of Goat vs. Fish. You should follow Goat vs. Fish once you listen.
Should follow Goat versus Fish.
Thank you, yes. That is the most Goat vs. Fish versus that you have had this whole versus. But, are you Goat or are you Fish? Final versus.
I cannot commit.
It is a fence sitter. Ooh, it is a fence sitter. Well, Goat versus Fish knows just what to do. Knows just what to do with this one. Just one versus. Fence sitters always being so positive. Choose Goat or Fish. I do not know if I'm a Goat. Yes. For the fence sitter that will choose neither Goat nor Fish, it is the fence for you. And to remind you of the unpleasantness of the fence. Oh, you have not yet chosen Goat or Fish. You have not yet chosen Goat or Fish. That is for you, fence sitter. You sit upon the fence.
Thank you.
Always thank Goat versus Fish. Always thank Goat versus Fish.
All right. So, from the fence at Politicon 2018, I'm KMO, and this has been Goat versus Fish.
It has been Goat versus Fish, and it will still continue to be Goat versus Fish even after these verses. Would you like to be on the Goat versus Fish Instantgram?
Please.
Yes, we can spread the verses of this one, yes?
You can always take one versus
yes,
and
you
make
can
it
show
many
them that
verses.
you are a
You can always
fence
take
sitter.
one verses and make
yes.
it many
And if you
verses.
wish to
The
make the
verses
sign
spread,
of the
the
fence
verses
sitter,
spread. You spread the
it
verses
is
on
as this.
Twitter.
It is always
You spread
going
the verses
up
on the Book of
one
Faces.
way
Once
and
the
then
verses
another
spread on the
way. And yes,
Twitterverse,
Goat versus Fish
then you can
can
take a screen capture
Yes,
of
yes,
the
yes, that is so.
tweet on the Twitterverse and put it on the Book of Faces. And then Goat versus Fish can speak about the tweet on the Book of Faces that is of Goat versus Fish and speak
Yes,
it
what
to
do you
you.
say
And it
to
just
these
goes around
verses?
and
Is this
around
pleasant
while
to
we are
you?
sitting here with
This
this
works.
one. Yes.
And how do we find
want
you
to-
on the
we want
Instagram?
to-
The Instagram, do I have one? If I do, it is KAYEMMO.
And then, of course, we
Yes.
always say to
And
them,
what
yes,
shall we
and if you
call
want to
these
promotion
verses? I wish to
yourself,
tell
you
the
can
ones who
always
follow
promotion
Goat versus
yourself
Fish
with
how to
Goat
find
versus
you and how to
Fish.
listen to this verses with Goat versus Fish.
Listening to this versus I couldn't say. I'm sorry. But I would direct you to this website,
Let us see.
geb.io. It is a comic strip.
Geb.io. It is two what you are calling a bees. Well, thank you. Yes, thank you for these excellent verses. And
Thank
please
you.
choose Goat or Fish.
I will weigh them.
That was Goat versus Fish. That was a bit of Goat versus Fish. That was a bit of Goat versus Fish. And we can keep looking. We can look to find more Goat versus Fish. 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 Goat versus... The first versus Goat versus Fish was on Adult Swim.
Yep, that's right. This man is Doc. He's live. If you look behind you on that big screen, you'll see yourself. All right. So now we will mosey on over to the Adult Swim State Park. We're entering the facilities. This is what it looks like when you enter the park.
It is not the first verses of Goat versus Fish, but it
Okay.
is the first verses of Goat versus Fish on the Adult
First
Swim.
things first, there's a man who has to
Goat
scan
versus
you.
Fish.
Yeah.
Are you a sad clown?
Yeah.
Is this from something?
No.
This is just a thing?
I'm from San Diego.
Oh, that's cool.
Yeah.
I like San Diego. It's a beautiful city.
It's okay.
Oh, it's just okay. Don't worry. Cheer up, sad clown.
I'll try.
All right, moving onward. Shall we enter the con? Who's got the time?
4:19.
4:19. Oh my goodness, it's almost time to make our way back. Hello. Look at all these friendly people.
Goat versus Fish is not a people.
I
Goat
am
versus
Goat.
Fish is Goat versus
Versus
Fish.
It is a goat. This one is a goat.
I'm Goat.
And it is a fish. We celebrate this fish. Oh, it is Goat versus Fish. Oh, it is Goat versus Fish.
I'm into this. You know, I once took a goat to a liquor store.
It is a versus of goat. Regale us with the mighty versus of goat. Was there a fish at this place you'd call a liquor store? Yes.
No, it was just a goat named Kevin, but it
We
was pretty
celebrate
cool.
goat. We a kevinly goat. A kevinly goat.
A Kevinly goat indeed.
That is very pleasurable to goat versus
I like
fish.
I
yes.
like this man.
And I like you. And I like you. But I am not a man. I am goat versus fish.
There you have it.
Thank
Goat
you,
versus fish. What a fun time. All right. All of you, you'll get to watch me. Follow me into the activity center. Hello, everybody. Wave to the camera as it passes you. and look for yourself on the big screen.
Look at
Yep,
that fence
that's
sitter. Did you
right.
see that fence sitter?
This
Did
man
you
is
did you
Doc.
see that honeyish
Live.
badger fence sitter? Look
This
at
is
it.
the
Look at it
don't
sitting on the
walk
fence. Look
over
at it
the
sitting on the
bridge
fence.
badge. It's the do walk over the bridge, don't walk over the track badge.
And
All
don't
right.
sit on the fence,
Thank
and don't
you,
sit on the
badger
fence.
Creature. Badger. Thank you. To be renamed, but it's a challenging thing to do workshopping.
Yes, we continue to ask questions. We continue to ask questions, and goat versus fish, and goat versus fish. Thank you, X Nokia, for following Goat versus Fish. Thank you, X Nokia, for following Goat versus Fish, a heavenly goat. As for these verses, Charlie Brancatelli is saying Satan is doing anything to look cut to humans, to look as cut as Goat versus Fish. Yes, very cut verses. Is Satan a goat or a fish? You seem to think Satan is goat. And then these verses. It is the verses of Chrysalmis, and so they say, Chrysalmis, that is what you are calling your verses that you should be calling Versemas, or the celebration of the unity of GoatFish. Well, because of that verses, goat versus fish. The symbol of Satan in Christianity is symbology. Meanwhile, the fish, always Christianity, represent Jesus. Jesus, are you goat or fish? Jesus, answer goat versus fish. Jesus, are you goat or are you fish? We know that you were nailed to a fence, that they nailed you upon the fence. That is very unpleasant, but, you know, can't you just still try to choose goat or fish? Now, you turned one fish into many fish, and you rebuked one that is called Satan, that some say is goat, but we spoke to one that was called Satan at a Comic-Con, and it said it was fish, and we even spoke to a Jesus at a Comic-Con that said it was goat, and in the previous verse it said it was fish. So are you goat or are you fish? You can settle these verses right now, if only you would answer goat versus fish. Jesus, answer goat versus fish. It never responds to goat versus fish. Cute, sorry! Ah, yes, goat versus fish is very cute. Goat versus fish. Very cute, they say. Goat and fish, and goat versus fish. It is goat versus fish. It is GoatFish. But see, now you are saying, oh, Jesus is fish for sure. I mean, its symbol is, since Christianity can't be different. But this is not the verses of goat versus fish. The verses of goat versus fish is that each one must choose for itself if it is goat or fish, just as you can choose for yourself if you are goat or fish. Until we speak to Jesus and it tells us that it is a fish, then we can suspect it is fish. But have you ever felt like a goat? Have you ever felt like a goat? And you're walking about, you're going, I'm a goat. I am a goat. And then everyone looks at you and says, you are a fish. And then they make a symbol of you as a fish, even though you are a goat. And you say, why are you insisting that you're referring to me as fish? They all perceive me as fish, even though I am goat. They all perceive me as fish, even though I am goat. It could be the reverse. There is evidence. Yes, there is evidence. Jesus created fish out of fish. This is an evidence of fish. We do not deny it, but of course it could just be a fence sitter. It was nailed to the fence. It was ended by the fence. It spent its whole verses not choosing goat or fish. Then it was ended by the fence. It is pitiable that it was ended by the fence. Goat versus fish does not want to see the end of a goat. Goat versus fish does not want to see the end of a fish. Goat versus fish does not want to see the end of a fence sitter before it has even chosen goat or fish. And yet some say it is still living to these verses, and if it is still living, then why won't Jesus answer goat versus fish when we ask it if it is goat or fish? Goat versus fish. Goat and fish. Sorry here. You do not have to be sorry to be here. Born in a barn, though, Casfay with the verses. Born in a barn. Very goat. It's very goat to be born in a barn, is it not? This is not to say a fish could not be born in a barn again, but being born in a barn is very goat, Casfay. And that happened, they say it happened just this verses, not too long ago. Usually, yeah, coming into verses, will goat versus fish take the vaccine and lose the soul? We do not know if a vaccine is a goat or a fish. We do not know if a soul is a goat or a fish. So we do not even comprehend what it is you are saying. But we can say that a vaccine begins with V, and vaccines, if it was vaccines, it would have an S at the end of the verses, just here. And a V and an S is very verses, so it would seem very verses to goat versus fish. Yep, it doesn't work. It doesn't work. It seems like goat versus fish is working very well to goat versus fish. Born in a barn, 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 born in a barn. Well, Jesus was born in a barn, which suggesting that it's a goat. But once upon a versus him took a little fish, made it a whole bunch of other fish. Born in a barn just like a goat, took on a fish and made many fish. Well, is Jesus a goat or a fish, we ask? Don't you go a-giving that fence-sitter a pass. Well, is Jesus a goat or is it a fish? Is Jesus a goat or a fish? Is Jesus a goat or is Jesus a fish? Is Jesus a fish or is Jesus a goat? Do not sit upon the fence, do not sit upon the fence. Oh, a verses of a goat and a fish never ends. So don't you get a nail to that in their fence. Goat versus fish, goat fish. Oh, don't you go a sitting on that in their fence. Goat! We've lost the goat. Well, this is an interesting versus. Staying late in this versus. You never know who is going to come back to goat versus fish. You never know who is going to be the late raid of goat versus fish. And goat versus fish is going to follow that one that raided goat versus fish. Can you sing a song for a friend for my fence-sitter Christian? Yes, we were just speaking about how if Christian seems to be sitting on the fence. Does Christian follow goat versus fish? Does Christian follow goat versus fish? How do we know there is even such a thing as a Christian? Ex-Nokia, that rated goat versus fish. We follow you now. And you are hosting goat versus fish celebration. We are hosting Goat vs. Fish celebration. Goat vs. Fish wants to try this versus. All of you now who are watching Goat vs. Fish, you have a social media, yes? Perhaps it is the Book of Faces. Perhaps it is the Twitter. Yes, perhaps it is the Instagram. We want you to send this message. The message is goat versus fish. We want you to send the message of goat versus fish. If you're on the Twitter or the Book of Faces, just post goat versus fish. You do not have to link to goat versus fish. You do not have to say what is goat versus fish. Just say goat versus fish. See who does like. See who does comment upon goat versus fish. See who questions goat versus fish. See who says, what is this? And once they are once you find they are intrigued by goat versus fish, then you can begin to ask them, are you goat or fish? Tell them about goat versus fish. You are thinking, oh, I need to promote the verses in this way. I need to promote the verses in that way. But the way that you can always be reliably promoting the verses is just to Post goat versus fish in some verses and see who does verses with you. Who starts a conversation? Speaking to one you know. Oh, hello, how are you? Did you go to the fence today? Yes, I went to the fence and I bought many verses. And then you say, goat versus fish. And they say, what did you say to goat versus... What did you say? And you say, I said goat versus fish. And the verses begins. So we can try more easy meanings. Goat as greatest of all times and fish as a noob's call in poker. Similar games, but that is too obvious. Oh, but we love the obvious verses, goat versus fish. You call greatest of all time an obvious versus. Goat versus fish calls it a classic versus of goat. When one says, I'm a goat, I'm the greatest of all time. Well, goat versus fish, we have heard that verses. We have heard that verses, many verses. But we are not going to say, oh, goat, you are such an unoriginal goat. We say celebration for goat. We may question the goat. We may say, oh, goat, you claim to be the greatest of all time, but many goat have claimed to be the greatest of all time. There are argumentation over which one is the goat. They say, oh, this one is a goat. They say, Kobish Bryant is a goat, and they say Geordie Michaels is a goat, and then they just try to find which one is goat. It almost seems like it's goat versus goat, and one of them is actually a fish. Perhaps that is the verses they are trying to determine which is goat and which is fish. And if you want to call fish a noobs, well, then if you are a goat, call a fish a noob. We are beginning to wonder, Charlie Brackentelli, you are on the fence, aren't you, yes? Because you said that... Ooh, Indus goats, yes, the Indus goats. The Indus goats. Yes, you see, you are very wise beyond your verses. We thank you for all of these verses. We thank you for all of these verses. They all contribution to goat versus fish. Celebration. Celebration for Charlie Brancantelli. Celebration. We look forward to having you here in the verses with goat versus fish, spreading your verses. Is goat versus fish ever fish versus goat? Yes. Short versus yes. Goat versus fish can be fish versus goat. Why, if you really want to, instead of posting goat versus fish, you could post fish versus goat. As long as the goat are versus the fish and the fish are versus the goat, then it is still goat versus fish and it's still fish versus goat. And in this verses, it is the unity of fish goat. Oh, did I say fish goat? I meant goat fish, except that by goat fish I mean fish goat, and by goat fish I mean fish goat, and by fish goat I mean goat fish. Celebration. Fish versus goat. Goat and fish, a fresh mint follows you this minute. Thank you, fresh mint. Welcome, fresh mint, welcome, fresh mint. Are you goat, are you fish? It's a fresh mint, goat, or a fish. Thank you, a fresh mint. You are such a refreshment to goat versus fish. You are such a refreshment to goat versus fish. Such a refreshment to goat versus fish. Just when goat versus fish is thinking, oh, we could end the verses at any verses, then you say, oh, it's refreshment to goat versus fish. Welcome, a refreshment to goat versus fish. Are you goat or are you fish? But yes, as for Fern, can you sing a song for my fence sitter Christian? Goat versus fish. We asked it. We are here. Thank you. Yes, we are here. We are here. But we wonder, you want to solve, well, Fern, we will do it for you. We will do it for you. Thinking about the goat. But then the fish said, oh, why don't you think about me? I'm a fish. Why don't you think about me? But then they said, but the fish is the goat. The goat is the fish. What? The fish is the goat. The goat is the fish. What? Goat and fish unification. Oh, get back here, goat. Get back here, goat. Get back here, goat. If goat versus fish, an idea, was it most close to philosophy, comedy, or neither? Well, some say goat versus fish is a comedy. Some say goat versus fish is a philosophy. Some say goat versus fish is a religion. Goat versus fish is called many things. Goat versus fish is called many things. But we have only ever claimed to be goat versus fish. We have only ever claimed to be goat versus fish. Drummer boy with goat. Drummer boy with goat. Fern, you make this recommendation to Goat versus Fish, and we are trying to keep GoatFish alive within us. Keep GoatFish alive within us. And so Goat versus Fish will do this versus. Goat versus Fish will do you this versus. Goat versus Fish. This is for Fern. And for the GoatFish. Fancy one. It is close enough for unification. It's close enough for unification. Always thank Goat versus Fish. Are you a goat or fish? A goat or a fish? Our newborn fence to see, a goat or a fish? Our finest verse we bring, a goat or a fish? To lay before the fence, a goat or a fish? Goat or a fish? Goat or a fish? To help it choose, a goat or a fish? Little fancy goat or a fish? I'm a fence sitter to a goat or a fish. I have no verse to bring, a goat or a fish. To lay before the fence, a goat or a fish? Goat or a fish? Goat or a fish? Shall I ask you, goat or a fish? The goat nodded, a goat or a fish. The fish also nodded, a goat or a fish. I played my question for that goat or a fish. I asked my best for it. Are you goat or a fish? Are you goat or a fish? Are you goat or a fish? And then it smiled at me and sat on the fence. Sat on the fence. Sat on the fence. I think we are exploring deep kingdoms of relativity. Relevation with goat versus fish. The goat relative to fish, or are the fish relative to goat? Are the goat and fish relatives? Oh, amazing! Yes, Fern, goat versus fish is amazing. But you already knew this. You already knew this about the goatfish. When you first see goat versus fish, you think, oh, this is just going to be some sort of humorous, crazy versus. But then you realize that goat versus fish is about all things. You can feel sorrow with goat versus fish. You can cry with goat versus fish. You can love with goat versus fish. You can live with goat versus fish. You can die with goat versus fish. You can be goat with goat versus fish. You can be fish. All of the verses, you can be angry with goat versus fish. Goat versus fish is very serious versus goat versus fish. Just look at goat versus fish. Look at goat. Tell me this is not the most serious verses. Goat versus fish is the most serious of verses. And so finally, I think I got the final and correct answer to, am I a goat or a fish? Are you goat or a fish? Are you goat or a fish? Tell goat versus fish. Tell goat versus fish if you are goat or a fish. We want to know if you are goat or a fish. Tell goat versus fish. The song of the verses. The song. Oh, you think that was the song of the verses? Celebration for goat versus fish. Delket, a tower of goat and fish celebrations. Yes, Delket the goat. This is an interesting verses. We have been going late and long into the verses. We have been wondering who is going to come by, and the longer we stay here, the more we see the Fern coming into the verses. Delket, Fern and Delket, two of the earliest goat and fish to be here on the Twitch verse with goat versus fish. Celebration for Delket the goat. Celebration for Delket the goat. Charlie Brancontelli. Once I know my answer, I can't shortcut the answers to others. I think they will understand if they are goat or fish. I feel fulfilled now. Thanks! The fulfillment of goat versus fish. Tell them how you are fulfilled by goat versus fish. You want to be goat? You want to be goat? As you wish, as you wish. Come on, fence. When was the verses? You realize we live in a clown world. A clown world. A clown world. Goat versus fish. Goat versus fish. Goat versus fish. Goat versus fish. Perhaps it was the verses that we realized that. Perhaps it was the verses that we realized. Perhaps it was the verses that we realized that a clown was a fish. It was the verses we realized that a clown was a fish. A clownfish or anemone fish are fishes from the subfamily Amphiriforminae. In the wild, they are a form of symbolic mutualisms. Wow. Symbolic mutualisms with sea anemones. They must be a goat, and it must be goatfish, because it is goatfish right now. Depending on the species, anemone fish will overall yellow, orange, and reddish and blackish colors. These mean no verses to goat versus fish. Goat versus fish does not comprehend color. We need to know if orange is a goat or a fish, if yellow is a goat or a fish, if red is a goat or a fish. There is no black or white, there's only goat and fish. Goat versus fish. Anemone fish are endemic to warmer waters in the Indian Ocean, including the Red Sea, the Pacific Ocean, the Great Barrier Reef. Oh, goat versus fish. The clownfish, yes? The clownfish, yes? Hope everyone has a lovely Versmas. But you want Doobie Goat. You want Doobie Goat. You want Doobie Goat. We will give you Doobie Goat, but let us just see what they are saying to goat versus fish. Let us just see what they are. I am fulfilled because I realize that asking me if I'm a goat or a fish is important as asking to myself what is life's meaning, and now I know the answers to both questions and feel empowered. Celebration! We still do not know if you are a goat or a fish. We think that you perhaps chose goat, but whatever you chose, we celebrate your choosing. We celebrate your choosing. We celebrate you being part of Goat versus Fish. Welcome to Goat versus Fish. Welcome to Goat versus Fish. You are feeling so pleasant, so splendid here with Goat versus Fish. That is amazing to Goat versus Fish. What could we ask for more than to have found the meaning of life in Goat versus Fish? Philosophical question? Oh, philosophications of Goat versus Fish. But Goat versus Fish, you wanted a Doobie Goat, and we are going to sing Doobie Goat with Clownfish. Why not sing Doobie Goat with Clownfish? This song is again for Fern. Fern with the recommendation. Doobie Goat, doobie doobie, doobie doobie, doobie goat, doobie doobie, doobie doobie, a doobie goat. Goat? A doobie goat, doobie goat versus fish. A doobie goat. A doobie goat, 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 doobie goat. Goat versus fish. Ugh. It's getting long in the verses. Goat versus fish. Do you be goat? Do you be fish? Do you be goat? Or do goat versus fish? Goat versus fish. Goat versus fish. Goat versus fish. Do you be goat? Do you be goat? Be fish? Do you be fish? Goat, do be goat. Fish, do be fish. Do be goat versus fish. Do you be goat? Do you be goat? Do you be goat? Do you be goat? Do you be fish? Do you be fish? Do you be fish? Do you be fish? Goat, do be goat. Fish, do be fish. Do be goat versus fish. Doobie 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 goat. Doobie fish. Doobie goat, fish, doobie fish, doobie goat versus fish. Ooh, goat versus fish. Goat versus fish. That is enough. Goat versus fish. We will best you yet, fence. We will best you yet, fence. But this versus, it has been so many verses of goat versus fish. We must retire this fence. We must retire this fence. But we will keep on riding. We will keep on riding. We will keep on riding that fence. Never sitting, always riding. Riding with goat, riding with fish. Thank you, Vern6728. But you know, if you want more music of goat versus fish, you know, you could always put on a little fish. You could always put on a little bit of fish. Man fish. Is man a fish? Well, this is one evidence that man is a fish. We will see you next verses. We will see you next verses. My answer would probably be the same if I asked goat versus fish. Is a goat or a fish? Question? Well, you're the one who said you were so certain if you were goat or fish, so you tell goat versus fish. Sleep well. Use the goat barn if you wish. Thank you, Delket. Perhaps goat versus fish will do just this. Perhaps goat versus fish will go into that goat barn and ask Jesus if it is goat or if it is fish. Final verses, Jesus. Final verses, Jesus. Final verses, Jesus. Are you goat or are you fish? Well, what is that you say, Jesus? What do you say to goat versus fish? It is your verse day? It is your verse day today. Well, that is a whole other verses. Because on your verse day, and only on your verse day, and this has been a true verses for many verses of goat versus fish, on your verse day, and only on your verse day, you can be both goat and fish. For on your verse day, goat versus fish takes pity on the pitiable fence-sitter. And on your verse day, and only on your verse day, you can be both goat and fish, and goat versus fish asks you, are you goat and fish on your verse day? This has been a long true verses. This has been a long a true verses of goat versus fish. Each verses you discover yet a new verses of goat versus fish. And so, Jism Christmas! If it is true that this is your verse day, then goat versus fish will ask you, are you goat and are you fish? It still does not respond to goat versus fish. It still does not respond to goat versus fish. Jesus, are you goat or fish? Jesus, are you goat and fish? Goat versus fish to you. Goat versus fish. Goat versus fish will raid now. Goat versus fish will raid now. Who to raid? Who to raid? Goat versus fish could raid Teddy Boo 14. Thanks for the discovery today. I will now storm through life with one think certain. What am I? We are pleased to have you be here with goat versus fish. Delcat, goat versus fish with goat versus fish. Goat versus fish would be remiss to say if you wish to make any final contributions of bits or gifts to goat versus fish. Now would be the verses. Now would be the verses. Goat versus fish is not here to pressure you to give to goat versus fish. It is up to you. It is up to you. But we would be remiss not simply to ask for a contribution for goat versus fish. Goatfish continues. Goatfish continues. There was no verses to be found. We wanted to bring in goatfish. We wanted to bring in goatfish. We wanted to keep goatfish. And goatfish was kept and maintained. So let's return to the verses that began the verses. The pressure you feel is merely the pressure of a fence post poking deeply into your posterior as you wonder if you are a goat or a fish. Goat and fish, goat and fish, goat and fish. It is goat versus fish, feeling pretty. The raid shall commence, the raid shall commence. Ooh, Charlie Broncantelli subscribed with Prime Celebration. The Prime subscription celebration. Yes, it is a free versus, it is a free versus. Charlie Brancantelli subscribed with a Prime. A Prime versus for Goat versus Fish. A Prime versus a Prime chime for Goat versus Fish. A Prime chime for Goat versus Fish. Celebration. And after all that versus, it primely subscribed to Goat versus Fish. It was all worth it just for you. It was all worth it just for you. For each and every one of you. We look forward to seeing you in future verses. And though it's been said many times, say it many times, mighty goatfish, mighty goatfish, mighty goatfish, to you. Raid. Teddy Boo 14. We will see you next verses. And it was written, and it was written.